Picture a city with 10,000 gas lamps burning through the fog, where the richest square mile on earth sits close enough to the poorest slums that you could throw a stone from one world into the other. Now fill that picture with women, hundreds of them, sleeping under bridges, standing in queues outside soup kitchens, pressing themselves into doorways to escape the rain, waiting for a slot in a shelter that has room for 60 but is wanted by 300. Women who are not young. Women whose faces have been worked over by decades of cold and hunger, and things worse than cold and hunger. Women that the city has used up and put down, the way you put down a tool when it breaks, except a broken tool at least gets thrown somewhere definite. That's London, that's 1903. The greatest city in the history of the world, and somewhere inside it, you are 56 years old and your boots have a hole in the left sole that you've been stuffing with newspaper for going on 3 weeks. And the newspaper is wet now, has been wet since Tuesday, and your foot has that deep cold ache that goes past cold and starts to feel like something else entirely, like your bones are slowly turning into something that isn't bone anymore. And the fog is coming down off the Thames tonight, and it smells like coal smoke and river mud and old fish and something else underneath that you stopped trying to name about 15 years ago. Welcome to London in the reign of Edward VII. Population 4.5 million souls. Empire stretching across a quarter of the globe. The most sophisticated, the most powerful, the most wealthy, the most modern civilization the human species has ever produced. And somewhere in all of that, they have absolutely no idea what to do with you. I make these history stories for people who want to sleep. I genuinely cannot tell you whether that means you find them relaxing, or whether you're just the sort of person who needs someone talking in your ear about wet boots and Victorian social policy before your brain agrees to shut down. Either way, here we are. Get comfortable. This one is different from the others. This one isn't about merchants or apprentices or the thrill of a new city waiting to be discovered. This one is about what happens after the thrill ends. What happens when the city is done with you. What you do when you're a woman in 1903 London and you have run out of options and the cold is coming and you have exactly 4p in your pocket and nowhere safe to sleep. Here we go. Your name is Ada Marsh, and you are not always this. That's the thing nobody tells you about the women who sleep rough on the embankment in the early years of the 20th century, or who queue outside the Whitechapel casual ward before dawn, or who sit in the back pews of mission halls eating thin soup and half listening to hymns they've heard so many times the words have stopped meaning anything. Nobody tells you that almost none of them started here. Almost all of them had something before. A room, a family, work, sometimes more than that, sometimes quite a lot more than that, depending on how far back you want to go. You were born in 1847 in a village in Wiltshire whose name you haven't said aloud in years, partly because it makes your throat do something strange, and partly because there is nobody left alive who would know it. Your father was a farm labourer. Your mother took in washing. You had 4 brothers and a sister and a house with 2 rooms and a fire that burned peat and sometimes wood and sometimes, when things were bad, nothing at all. You ate bread and potatoes and sometimes salt bacon, and on Sundays, if your father had worked a full week, a bit of something better. You know that life is gone. You have known it was gone for a very long time. But at 2 in the morning on an October night in 1903, standing on the Victoria Embankment with the Thames running black and fast 40 feet below you, and the fog closing down around the lampposts so that each one looks like a small pale moon, you think about that house in Wiltshire with a specificity that surprises you. The sound the latch made, the smell of your mother's hair, the way the frost drew ferns on the inside of the window in January, and you used to press your finger to the glass and trace the patterns before anyone else woke up. Your finger is pressed against the cold iron of the embankment railing now. The metal is so cold it almost stings. You take your hand away and fold it inside the other one, pressing both into the front of your coat, which is a man's coat, dark wool, too large for you, bought for twopence from a rag stall in Petticoat Lane about 2 years ago, and it's served you better than almost anything you've owned in a decade. Big enough to wrap around your body, heavy enough to hold some warmth, not enough warmth, never quite enough. There's a woman sitting on the bench nearest the bridge. You can see her from here, or rather you can see the dark shape of her, hunched forward, arms wrapped around herself, the faint glow of something burning between her fingers. A cigarette end she's found somewhere, or rolled herself from what she could salvage. She's been there since before you arrived an hour ago. Hasn't moved. From this distance, you can't tell if she's sleeping or just waiting. Waiting for what? That's a question that has stopped meaning anything, too. You know her name. Meg. Margaret, technically, though nobody's called her that in years any more than anyone has called you Ada in years. She's older than you, maybe 62 or 63, though she looks older than that in daylight, the way very thin people often look, as if the cold has pulled all the excess away and left only the sharp, essential lines. She came from Edinburgh originally, and you can still hear Scotland faintly in her voice when she speaks, though it had been worn down by decades of London streets the way a river wears down stone. She sleeps out more than you do. She has a philosophy about it that she's explained to you more than once. The shelters take too much from you. Not money, though they take that too if you have it. They take something else. They take the small last thing you have left, which is your own sense of yourself as a person who makes decisions, and once a place has taken that, you stop being able to get it back. So she sleeps out unless the cold is genuinely dangerous, and she has a system of judging what genuinely dangerous means that involves the temperature and the damp, and the way her hands feel, and most of the time she's right, and most of the time she survives the night, and some small part of you admires her for it, even while another part of you knows that it will kill her one winter, and that when it does, the obituary will not appear anywhere. You, though, you're going to try for a bed tonight. Not here. Not the arches. You've done the arches under the bridge. You know what the arches are. The space under the railway arches at Charing Cross, where women have been sleeping since before you came to London. And some nights there are 30 or 40 of them pressed together under those stone vaults, sharing body heat and the particular smell of poverty, which is unwashed wool and feet, and something that isn't quite decay but is in the same family as decay. The arches are warm in the way that any enclosed space with 30 bodies becomes warm, but they are not safe. Not in the way safety matters to women. Not in the way you have understood safety to matter since you were very young, in Wiltshire, before you knew it was a category at all. You're going to try for the shelter in Clapham Road. The shelter in Clapham Road is run by the Salvation Army, and it costs 2p a night for a bed, which is more than it sounds, because 2p is the price of a large loaf of bread. And when you have 4p in your pocket, the choice between sleeping somewhere warm and eating tomorrow is not a comfortable one. But you have been outside for 3 nights now, since the room in Waterloo that you shared with 2 other women was abruptly ended when the woman who let it turned out to have been subletting from someone who was subletting from someone else. And the landlord arrived one morning, and there were words, and then there were no more rooms, and here you are. The shelter is 2 miles away. Your foot hurts already, and it's 2 miles, and it's past 2 in the morning, and the fog is thick enough to make the lampposts into pale smears of light, and the streets this time of night are not quite empty, but the people who are in them at this hour are mostly not people you want to interact with, particularly not if you're a woman alone with fourpence in her pocket, which is to say that you're both a potential target and irrelevant, that you represent both a small risk and no particular opportunity, which is a position you have occupied in this city for about 15 years now. You say something to Meg as you pass the bench. Not much, just letting her know you're going. She lifts her head, shows the pale oval of her face in the dark, and says to watch yourself on the Lambeth Road, because there was a man, and you nod, understanding what that means and not needing her to finish the sentence. Then you start walking. The embankment at night is one of the great strange things about this city that most people who live in the city never see, because most people who live in this city are asleep at this hour. The river is on your left, running fast and black and smelling of everything the city has put into it, which is everything the city has. 100 yards out, a barge is moving upstream, dark against the dark, its running light a small red eye in the fog. The oarsman, or the engine, you can't tell at this distance, makes no sound you can hear over the water. The thing just moves, steady and purposeful in the dark, and you watch it until it disappears. The embankment was built in the 1860s. Sir Joseph Bazalgette, that's the name, the engineer who did it, who drained the old foreshore and drove the great sewers underneath and faced the whole thing in granite and put the plane trees along the top and the benches where Meg is sitting right now. He also built the Chelsea embankment and the Albert embankment, and together they narrowed the Thames and changed the way water moved through this part of the city and ended the great plagues of cholera that used to kill thousands of Londoners at a time. So the embankment arguably saved more lives than almost any structure in this city's history. It also created one of the largest outdoor sleeping places for homeless women in Europe, which is not what Bazalgette intended, or maybe he just didn't think about it. That's the way with most things that are built in this city, actually. The people who design them are not thinking about people like you. They're never thinking about people like you. You've come to understand this so deeply over the years that it no longer surprises you or even particularly bothers you. It's simply one of the facts of the physical world, like the fact that water runs downhill and the fact that the cold is colder when it's damp. You turn left off the embankment and into the streets. The streets at night in this part of London are not the streets you see during the day. Not the ones people would describe if asked to describe London streets. The hansom cabs and the omnibuses and the costermongers with their barrows and the flower girls and the sandwich board men and the clerks in their good coats, walking to the offices, all of that is sleeping now. What's left is different. A man carrying something too bulky and moving too quickly. Women in doorways, some working, some just sheltering. The distinction not always obvious from a distance. A gas lamp whose mantle has cracked so it gutters and hisses and throws the whole pavement into a twitching, unreliable light. A dog that follows you for half a street and then decides you have nothing it wants and peels away into an alley. The smell changes every 20 yards. Coal smoke is the constant, the base note under everything, because there are 2 million coal fires burning in this city at any given moment, and the smoke never entirely leaves. It just compacts and diffuses in the fog until the fog itself is brown and slightly oily. The famous London particular, which is not romantic when you breathe it every day, but is simply a form of slow poisoning that you've been undergoing for 38 years. Then over the coal smoke, the smell from a tannery somewhere to the south, that deep brown stink of hides in acid that you can taste as well as smell. A bakery somewhere very close. bread in the ovens all ready for the morning, and the smell of it so good that your stomach clenches and makes a noise that startles you in the quiet street. A drain. Something dead in the drain, or near it. Wet stone. A horse that has recently been here, very recently, within the last minute probably, because the smell is fresh and hot in the cold air. Your foot. You've been trying not to think about your foot, but your foot is insisting on being thought about, the way a bad thing always does. The newspaper's gone entirely to mush inside the boot now, and the cold of the wet stone is coming through the hole in the sole directly against your heel, and there is a specific kind of pain that wet cold creates in old injuries, and your left foot has several old injuries, and none of them are things you want to explain to anyone, because explaining them requires explaining things you don't explain. So you walk. You shift your weight to the outer edge of the boot, which helps a little. You count the blocks. Lambeth Road. Meg said, "Watch yourself on the Lambeth Road. You watch yourself. There's a man at the corner leaning against the wall under the lamp, and he watches you pass with the particular quality of attention that means he's calculating something. You've spent enough of your life being calculated that you can feel it without looking directly at it. You don't look at him. You keep your pace steady. Not slow enough to invite, not fast enough to imply fear, because fear invites the same things that slowness does, for different reasons. You walk the way you have learned to walk at night in this city, which is with a quality of absolute certainty about where you're going, even when you're not entirely certain, because certainty is its own form of protection, because predators of all kinds are more interested in the uncertain. He doesn't follow you. 2 miles takes you about 40 minutes when your foot is like this. By the time you turn into Clapham Road, the fog has thinned slightly, and you can see further, which means you can see the queue. The queue outside the Salvation Army shelter for women is never a comfortable sight at this time of night. Not because of what it is. You have been part of it often enough to know exactly what it is, but because of what it represents, which is the distance between the world that is lit and heated and fed, and the world that is standing in a line in the dark waiting to be admitted to a place that is lit and heated and fed. And the distance between those two worlds is the distance between a woman who has somewhere to be and a woman who has nowhere to be, and you stand in that queue, and you feel the distance, and there is nothing to be done about it except stand in the queue. There are about 20 women ahead of you. Some of them you recognise. A woman they call Dorset, though she's from Yorkshire, who has one arm and carries her blanket under the other with a kind of practised expertise. A girl, younger than most, perhaps 30, who you've seen before but don't know the name of, her hair in the particular state of disarray that means she hasn't been inside for several days. 2 women together who are clearly friends or something like it, who stand close and talk quietly and share a pipe back and forth, and you recognise this kind of closeness and what it means, which is that they have found each other in the particular way women find each other, when the city has left them with nothing except each other, and there is something in watching it that makes your chest hurt and you look away. You stand in the queue, your foot throbs, the fog drifts. The gas lamp above the shelter door gives out a circle of yellowish light that the women near the front stand half inside and half outside of, and the ones inside the light look more solid, more real, more like they exist, and the ones outside the light look like they might at any moment simply dissolve into the fog and not be found. The door opens at 2:30. A woman in a Salvation Army uniform, dark coat, bonnet, the particular expression of someone who has committed themselves to a very difficult thing and is determined to see it through, opens it and counts the women in one by one, and when she counts 22, she says that's the lot for tonight. Very sorry. And the door shuts again. You are number 24 in the queue. You stand there for a moment with the cold pressing in from every side, and you think about the 2 miles you just walked, and the decision you made on the embankment and the fourpence in your pocket, and the bakery smell back on the street that had made your stomach clench. And then you unfold all of that and set it aside because there is nothing to be done with it, and dwelling is a luxury you've learned you can't afford. You turn around, there are other places. The embankment is not the worst option. The night is cold, but not dangerous cold. Not the kind of cold that Meg calibrates by the feeling in her hands. Not the killing kind. You have survived worse nights. You know the places that are better than the open air. The waiting room at Waterloo Station, where you can sometimes sit until a policeman asks you to move. The church porch on Lambeth Palace Road that has a deep enough arch to keep the worst of the wind off. The night shelter off Blackfriars, smaller than the Salvation Army place, run by a woman named Mrs. Greer, who has strong views about the causes of poverty and likes to share them at length, but who also sometimes lets women in after the official count if they seem in bad shape. You're not in bad shape by the standard you use for bad shape. Wet foot, cold, hungry. But you were hungry this time yesterday too and the day before. A moderate, persistent hunger that has been part of your life for long enough that it barely registers as a condition anymore. It's just the background state of your body. You're not sick. You're not injured. Not in any new way. You're 56 and you've been doing this for a long time and you know your own limits better than anyone. You start walking back toward the river. You've been 56 years old for 3 months. Before you were 56, you were 55. And before that, 54. And so on back and back in the way years go, which is steadily and without particular drama until you look back and the distance is enormous. You remember being 40 and thinking 40 was terrifying. You remember being 30 and thinking 30 was old. You were wrong about both of those. At 40 you were still working, in the sense that the word work applies to what you were doing. At 30 you were still, well, different. You were different at 30. You were in London at 30. You had been in London for 6 years at 30. And in those 6 years you'd been a factory girl in Bermondsey for 8 months until the work ran out. And then you'd been a laundress for 1 year until your hands gave out from the lie and the constant wet. And then you'd been in service for 2 years for a family in Islington, who were kind in the way that people who have never needed kindness are kind, which is with a complete blindness to the things they are asking of you. And then the family had moved and you had not been taken with them, and then you had been in the city with a small bag and a smaller amount of money, and it had been winter. You don't tell people what happened next. Not because it's a secret exactly. It's not a secret. Nothing about what happened next is a secret. The city is full of women who know exactly what happened next. Every magistrate and social reformer and writer of pamphlets about the condition of the London poor knows what happened next. But because the telling requires a kind of emotional equipment you no longer have, you used to be able to tell it with distance, with a flat voice of someone reporting a fact about the weather. Now even the distance is gone. There is just the fact, and the fact is what it is, and you leave it there. What it left you with, what the next 20 years of your life left you with, is an intimate knowledge of a particular geography of London that does not appear on any tourist's map. The streets around the Haymarket, though, that has changed enormously since your time there. The streets behind the Strand, the houses off Regent Street, The specific hierarchy of places and what each one meant and what each one cost you and who the men were who ran them, and the different ways they had of making you understand what you were and what you were for. You were not the worst case by the standard of those places. You were never the worst case. You were careful in the ways that careful means when you're doing what you were doing, and carefully means you survived more things than some women survived and fewer things than others. You did not die of the things that killed women like you at the rates they killed women like you in the 1870s and 1880s. You did not end up in one of the lock hospitals with the unspoken wards. You did not, most importantly, get old very quickly, the way some women did, the way poverty and cold and certain kinds of treatment age a person in visible and structural ways, and getting old quickly was the thing that ended everything. Because the thing that ended your particular form of work was not a decision or a rescue or a change of heart, but simply time. The inexorable fact of time. The way your face stopped being the face that the particular trade wanted and started being a different kind of face. And once that happened, you were back where you had been at 22, except 20 years older and with different knowledge. You were 38 when that happened. Some women go longer. Some women don't make it to 38. You were 38, and you took whatever work was available. And for a while, there was work, cleaning work, washing work, the kind of work your hands knew, even if the specific work was different from before. And for a while it was enough or nearly enough, and nearly enough is a form of enough when you're trained to accept it. But nearly enough has a way of becoming almost enough, and then not quite enough, and then definitely not enough. And the steps between those things are very small and very easy to take without noticing you're taking them. And by the time you're 50, you've been taking those small steps for 12 years, and the distance you've covered is enormous. 50 was hard. You don't want to think about 50 right now, walking through the fog toward the embankment with your wet foot and your fourpence. 50 can stay where it is. The Blackfriars Night Shelter is a room above a mission hall on a street that is technically off Blackfriars, but is really its own small world. A court off a court with houses on 3 sides and a communal tap in the centre that runs from 9 to 11 in the morning and is shut the rest of the time. The mission hall at ground level is where the Methodist men come on Sunday evenings to play harmonium and hand out bread and save souls in the way they understand saving souls, which involves a lot of standing up and sitting down and words that were written for a different kind of person's suffering. You've sat through many of their services. The bread is good. It's white bread. Actual white bread, not the grey sawdust bread from the cheaper bakers, and when you're hungry enough, the distinction between kinds of bread matters enormously. The shelter above is Mrs. Greer's domain. Mrs. Greer is 67 years old, which is 13 years older than you, though she looks younger because she has had what she would call a settled life, which means she's had a life in which the major structural elements, shelter, warmth, food, safety, have been consistent enough that they haven't written themselves permanently onto her face. She wears black, always, and has grey hair pulled into a bun so tight it must hurt, and she has opinions about gin and about the Liberal government and about the moral qualities of poverty that she does not keep to herself. She has also, over the approximately 8 years you've been coming to this shelter, quietly given you food and a clean pair of stockings, and on one occasion when you were genuinely ill, a bed for 4 days with no payment expected. And she has never once made you feel that these things cost her more than she was glad to give. You have complicated feelings about Mrs. Greer that involve gratitude, and something that is not quite resentment, but lives in the same neighbourhood. The light is on above the mission hall, and You knock at the side door, the women's door, 3 times in the particular pattern that means you're known here, and after a minute it opens and it's not Mrs. Greer but one of the young women volunteers, a girl of perhaps 22 with a round face and the kind of expression that means she's been doing good works for long enough to have encountered suffering, but not long enough to have stopped being surprised by it. "We're full," she says. Then she looks at you again, with the looking that means she is calculating something. But what she is calculating is different from the man on the Lambeth Road. It is a calculation about need and capacity and what her supervisor would do. "Let me ask Mrs. Greer." She leaves you on the step. The cold while you stand on the step is a specific cold, different from the walking cold. When you walk, you generate enough heat to keep the worst of it at the surface of your skin. Standing, the cold begins to press inward, through the coat, through the layers beneath, through your skin, and into the space where warmth is manufactured. You feel your shoulders pulling up toward your ears and make them stop, which requires a specific effort of will, because hunching is what cold does to a body when you let it. It curls you in on yourself, and staying uncurled feels like a form of argument against the cold, which is probably foolish, but is also the kind of foolishness that turns out to matter. Mrs. Greer appears. She looks at you. She looks at your foot, the wet leather, the way you're standing. "Go up," she says, not unkindly. "Floor, I'll bring a blanket." The shelter room is long and low, with 8 iron beds along the walls and the floor between them covered with women on bedrolls and blankets. The overflow, the ones who didn't make the beds but got something nonetheless. It's warm. The warmth of bodies and a small iron stove in the corner that one of the women is feeding with something. A chunk of coal or maybe wood, and the smell is the shelter smell, the compounded smell of people who have been outside for a long time and are now inside, which is complex and not pleasant but is so familiar to you that it registers merely as the smell of being somewhere safe enough to sleep. You find a space near the far wall, close enough to the stove to feel its edge of warmth. You sit down, take off your left boot carefully and look at the newspaper inside it, which has become a dark grey pulp. You peel it out piece by piece and set it aside. Your foot is red, and the skin around the heel is soft and wrinkled from the wet and cold in the way skin goes when it's been submerged. You flex your toes. They work. The ache is deep but consistent, not sharp, which in your experience means nothing is badly damaged. Mrs. Greer comes with a grey blanket and a rag. The rag is warm, or warmish, dampened with water from the kettle. "Wipe the foot," she says, "dry as you can. Don't put the boot back on tonight." You do as you're told. There is a particular quality to being cared for that is almost unbearable in certain circumstances, the tenderness of it, the reminder of what your body is and what it deserves, and you have learned to accept this kind of care without the flinching that used to come, without the sense that you don't deserve it, which was a long time learning. You wrap the blanket around yourself and your foot and lean against the wall. The stove ticks and pops. Someone near the window is coughing, the deep chest cough of a cold that has been neglected past the point of a simple cold. 2 women in the corner are talking very quietly, their voices not reaching words from where you sit, just the low murmur of human voices, which is one of the best sounds, you have decided, one of the sounds that most reliably means you are not alone. And not being alone is a thing you value in ways that surprise you sometimes with their intensity. You're going to sleep soon. You can feel the warmth from the stove starting to reach the parts of you that have been cold for hours. The slow melting of it. your shoulders finally releasing, your hands unclenching from the fists they've been making inside the coat pockets. The pain in your foot is still there, but it's manageable. It's a pain that has a shape and a boundary, not the diffuse spreading pain of cold, but the specific pain of something that will be better in the morning if you stay warm, but you're not asleep yet. And there is a woman across the room from you, in one of the iron beds, sitting up against the headboard with her knees drawn up and her arms wrapped around them, and she is staring at the floor in front of her with an expression you have seen on many faces in many rooms like this, and it means something specific. It means she is not here. She is somewhere else, somewhere that is worse than this room or different from this room, some memory that is more present to her right now than the stove or the other women or the grey blanket. Her name is Frances. You know this because you've been here at the same time as Frances before. She's younger than you, 40-something, with dark hair that has some grey in it now, and a face that is still handsome in the particular way of women whose looks were once their main resource, and who still carry the structural evidence of it even when everything else has changed. Frances was in the Haymarket, the same streets you were in the same years. You've never said this to each other directly. You didn't need to. There is a language in the way women like you recognize each other that is older than words and doesn't require them. She looks up and sees you watching her. You don't look away. That would be its own kind of statement. She tips her chin slightly. You do the same. This is the extent of the conversation, and it is complete. You close your eyes. The Salvation Army shelter on Clapham Road that turned your way tonight was opened in 1884 by William Booth, who started the Salvation Army in 1865 out of a tent in Whitechapel, and spent the next 40 years building an organisation that would feed and house an attempt to spiritually redeem more people on the margins of London society than almost any other institution in the city's history. Booth's 1890 book was called In Darkest England and the Way Out, and the title was a deliberate echo of Stanley's In Darkest Africa, and the point he was making was that there was a continent of suffering inside England itself, inside London itself, as unexplored and as terrible as anything in Central Africa, populated by people who had fallen through every net the civilized world had managed to build. He called them the submerged 10th, 10% of the English population permanently submerged. He was wrong about the 10%. It was higher, but the image was right. Submerged is exactly the right word for it. The sense of being below the surface of the world that the other 90% inhabit, being in the same city as them, breathing the same fog, walking the same streets, but separated from them by a membrane that is invisible and absolute. You're asleep before you finish the thought. You dream of bread. Not the white bread from the mission hall, though that's good bread, but the bread your mother used to bake in Wiltshire. The heavy brown bread with the crackled crust that she'd wrap in a cloth and put on the shelf, and you were not allowed to touch until it was properly cool, which was a rule you followed until you were about 7, and then started breaking regularly because the smell of warm bread was stronger than the rule. You dream of sitting at the table in the 2-room house and eating bread with butter and something sweet on top, honey or jam, and the warmth of the kitchen around you, and the sound of your brother in the next room, and the complete, uncomplicated safety of being 8 years old in a house where your mother is making bread. You wake at 6 because the shelter rule is that you're out by 6:30, and Mrs. Greer or whoever is on duty wakes people with enough time to observe the rule, and what wakes you is the sound of the young volunteer moving through the room, touching shoulders, saying quietly, "Time to get up. Time to get up," in the tone of someone who is trying to be gentle about something that isn't gentle. Your foot is better. Not right. Not by any means, but better than it was. The skin around the heel has dried out and the ache is surface level now. A superficial soreness rather than the deep bone complaint of last night. You test it gingerly, pressing the heel to the floor, and it holds. You look at the boot. You tear a dry piece off the corner of a newspaper that someone has left on the floor, fold it twice and put it in the boot as a temporary measure. It won't last the morning, but it'll help. Mrs. Greer is in the doorway when you come down. She presses something into your hand. You look down. A bread roll, still slightly warm, and a piece of hard cheese. You look up at her. Got a few extra, she says. The voice that means she is not going to discuss it. Thank you. Come back tonight if the weather turns bad. I mean it about the foot. You go out into the Clapham morning. Morning in this part of London in 1903 is already in full motion by 6 o'clock. The costermongers' carts are moving, the ones that go to Covent Garden or Borough Market to buy the day's stock and then bring it back to the neighbourhood streets. You can hear them on the main road, the creak and clatter of the wheels, the sound of a horse. Somewhere nearby, a chimney sweep is already at work. You can hear the distinctive brushing sound, the muffled thumping of the brush in the flue, the occasional shout of the boy being sent up. The sweep calls out to announce himself as he moves down the street. Sweep, sweep. Just that word, repeated, carried on the cold morning air. You eat the bread roll while you walk. You make yourself eat it slowly, make each bite count, break off small pieces and chew them completely before the next one. You know from experience that eating too fast when you're very hungry creates a specific kind of misery, a sort of rebellion of the stomach that is worse than the hunger. And besides, slowing down makes it last longer, and making things last longer is a skill you've had occasion to develop across most categories of resource. The cheese you put in your coat pocket, later. The morning is cold and clear, the fog having mostly lifted in the night, and the sky above the rooftops is the particular grey-blue of an October morning in London before the smoke has built up. A colour that is actually quite beautiful if you have a moment to notice it, which you occasionally do, which is one of the things about this life that surprises the people who write about it in pamphlets and never experience it directly. The moments of beauty that appear in it anyway, that arrive without asking permission, that the cold and the hunger and the tiredness can't entirely crowd out. You need to find work today. This is the constant fact of every morning. Not a dramatic fact, not a crisis fact. Just the quiet, persistent pressure of needing to find work today in the same way you needed to find it yesterday and the day before. The work available to a woman of your age in 1903 London is not plentiful, and it's worth understanding exactly how narrow the channel is, because the narrowness of it is one of the things that determines almost everything else about your life. It is also one of the things that is systematically invisible to the people who make the policies and run the institutions and write the books about the condition of women. They write about the young women who have fallen, the young women who can be rescued, the young women whose stories have a redemptive shape to them, the young women who can be sent to the laundries or the reformatories or the refuge homes and have their characters rebuilt and then be put to work in respectable service somewhere, proof that the system works. Women your age do not have a redemptive shape. The charitable organisations that exist in this city in 1903 for women in distress are not short of compassion, exactly, but they are heavily oriented toward youth, toward the possibility of transformation. toward women who have a future that can be shaped into something the organizations would recognize as a success. The Magdalen Homes, the penitentiary societies, the moral reform associations, they are not in practice designed for a 56-year-old woman with no living family and no references and a history that no decent employer would accept if they knew it, and no decent employer would not find out. What you can get, when you can get it, is charring work, daily cleaning work, scrubbing floors, cleaning grates, carrying slop buckets, washing stairs. Heavy work, cold work, work that your knees and back have opinions about, opinions they express loudly and persistently. You get it through word of mouth, through the women's networks that exist in this city and the margins, through women who know other women who know that a certain household needs someone for the week, or a boarding house needs a scrubbing woman for the winter. The pay is 10p a day if you're lucky, 6p if you're not. And if you work 5 days a week, every week of the year, you make about £22, which sounds like a figure until you put it against the cost of a room in London in 1903, which is at least 2 shillings 6p a week in the cheapest common lodging houses, which means you're spending over £6 a year on a bed in a room you share with strangers, and you still have to eat, and you still have to clothe yourself in a way that is respectable enough for the kind of people who might hire you as a charing woman, because the charing women who look too destitute don't get hired. There is minimum level of presentability below which the work dries up and you enter the free fall. You're at the minimum level of presentability. You know this. The coat helps. The coat makes you look like someone who is poor but maintaining herself, rather than someone who has stopped maintaining herself. And the distinction is everything in the economy of the charring market. Your primary employer at the moment, the word employer is perhaps too strong, but it's the best word available, is a boarding house on Lambeth Walk, run by a woman named Mrs. Porteous, who is 60 herself and stout, and has the particular manner of someone who has survived a great deal by refusing to acknowledge it. Mrs. Porteous needs someone to do the stairs and the front hall and the kitchen 3 mornings a week. She pays you 8p a morning and sometimes gives you breakfast, which is the most important part of the arrangement. The breakfast is usually porridge with a scraping of butter, and sometimes there is tea, real tea, not the dishwater version that passes for tea in the cheaper eating houses. You have a second source. A woman who runs a laundry in Vauxhall takes you on for the heavy lifting, carrying the wet sheets in and out of the mangles, hauling the coal for the coppers, maybe once or twice a week when her regular women don't show. It pays 6p, but the work is hard, and the steam and heat of the laundry, which sounds like it should be a relief in October, is actually its own misery, the kind that soaks through to your bones differently from cold and leaves you aching in new places. This is the total economy of your life. This and the shelter and the bread roll and the 4p that are now 2p. Because you spent the other 2 on the shelter last night, except you didn't get a bed at the shelter. You just walked 2 miles and then went to Mrs. Greer's and you still have the 4p. You stop walking. You have 4p. You have not spent it. The calculation feels important in a way that requires you to actually stop and add it up. 4p. A cup of tea and a piece of bread at a coffee stall is a penny. Supper at the mission hall tonight is free if you go to the service, which takes an hour of your time and leaves you with a particular feeling of having bartered something you couldn't quite quantify for something you needed. A bed at the Salvation Army shelter is 2p. That leaves nothing for tomorrow's tea. You have to get to Lambeth Walk by 8 for Mrs. Porteous. It's 6:20, you start walking again. London in October 1903 is at one of those moments where you can feel 2 centuries overlapping if you pay attention to it. The city is electric now. Electric trams on some of the major routes. Electric light in the shops and the underground stations and the houses of people who can afford it. But the electricity doesn't reach everywhere. Not yet. Not to the streets you walk. Not to the rooms you sometimes inhabit. The gas lamps are still burning along most of the side streets, will burn until a man comes around to extinguish them at full daylight. Horse traffic still dominates the road, even as the first motor cars have begun to appear, those rattling, terrifying machines that make horses bolt, and children stare, and everyone feel that the ground under their feet is less certain than it used to be. The century is new, technically. 3 years old. A new king on a throne. Victoria gone in 1901. Dead at last after 63 years. And the whole country had been holding its breath without knowing it was holding its breath. And when the breath released, there was a quality of change in the air that you, who have spent a great deal of your life attending to the quality of the air, because the quality of the air often tells you things the words don't, could actually feel. Things will be different, people said. Things will change. Some things have changed. The underground has grown. The shops on Oxford Street are enormous now. Harrods has its famous building in Knightsbridge, vast and gleaming. There are women bicycling in the parks, which would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, and women in the newspapers arguing about the vote, which would also have been unthinkable, and there are women doctors and women artists and women philanthropists of considerable public visibility. None of this has touched the Lambeth streets or the women on the embankment or the queue outside the shelter, which is not quite true actually. Some of it has touched them in the way that waves touch a shore. You feel the movement, but you're not swept anywhere new. The philanthropists have built more shelters, more mission halls, more reform organisations. The government has at least been discussing the question of the poor law, which hasn't been substantially reformed since 1834, which is a fact so remarkable you sometimes have to turn it over to make sure you've understood it correctly. The principal legislation governing the treatment of poverty in the wealthiest nation on earth was written in 1834 and is still, in 1903, the law. The workhouse is still the law. The principle of less eligibility, that a pauper's condition must be made less comfortable than the worst situation of an independent labourer, so that nobody enters the workhouse unless they truly have no alternative, is still the law. You have been in a workhouse. You've been in the Lambeth Infirmary, which is the workhouse's medical ward, when you were 45 and sick for 3 weeks, with a fever that came from no particular cause, but seemed determined to kill you anyway. You were there for 18 days. The ward was clean. The nurses were distant in the way that all institutional carers are distant, attending to the body without particular reference to the person inside it. You were fed and given medicine and kept warm, and when you were well enough to be discharged, you were discharged. The workhouse proper, the part where you live rather than the part where you're ill, you have not been. Not because you couldn't have qualified for it. There have been periods where you would certainly have qualified for it, but because the workhouse takes something from you that you have not been willing to give. It takes the last form of autonomy that the city leaves you with. Inside the workhouse you wear the uniform. You work the hours they set, the picking of oakum or the breaking of stones or the scrubbing of floors on the workhouse's schedule rather than your own. You're separated from the men's ward. which if you're alone isn't relevant, but if you have any kind of human connection, a friend, a companion, anyone, that connection is severed at the gate. You're categorized, you're managed, you're the object of other people's decisions about your life. You understand why women enter the workhouse. You understand completely. You have come within days of doing it yourself in 2 different winters. The cold can be very convincing. When the cold is convincing enough, abstract principles about autonomy seem much less important. But you have not done it yet. You arrive at Lambeth Walk at 5 to 8. Mrs. Porteous answers the door in a house dress, with flour on her hands, which means she's already been cooking, which means she's in the mood that comes from early starts and productive mornings, which is usually a good mood for your purposes. She looks at you, looks at your foot, the way your weight is distributed. Boot all right? Getting there. Go and start on the kitchen floor. There's porridge on the hob. Help yourself first. The kitchen of the Porteous boarding house is large by the standards of Lambeth Walk, which means it's a kitchen with room to move around in, with a range that takes up most of one wall, and a scrubbed pine table in the centre, and copper pans hanging on hooks, and the smell of porridge and coal, and something else. Onions, maybe. That is the smell of a kitchen that is used for actual cooking, rather than just kept as a space where food occasionally passes through. You serve yourself a bowl of porridge and stand at the range to eat it. Standing, because sitting would imply a permanence that isn't yours to claim in this kitchen. Standing because it's quicker, and because you can start on the floor the moment you're done. The porridge is good, thick, properly cooked, with a scraping of dripping melted through it rather than butter, but hot and filling in the way that thick porridge is filling, the way it sits in your stomach like a warm stone and makes the morning feel more survivable. You eat it in 6 minutes. The kitchen floor is flagstone, 14 feet by 12, with a drain in the centre and grease accumulated around the base of the range that resists the scrubbing brush the way grease in cold conditions always does, which is by becoming semi-solid and requiring a combination of hot water and physical force to shift. You fill the bucket from the copper that's been heating on the range. Hot water, actual hot water. This is one of the genuine luxuries of working for Mrs. Porteous rather than the cheaper establishments. Add a measure of washing soda from the tin on the shelf, and kneel. Your knees have views about kneeling. Your knees have had views about kneeling for approximately the last 7 years, views expressed in the form of a grinding sensation in the right one, and a sharper, more specific objection from the left, the one that was twisted in an incident 15 years ago that was never properly seen to. The grinding you've learned to work through, the sharp objection you have learned to manage by adjusting how you hold yourself, keeping your weight on the left arm rather than the left knee, distributing things differently. It adds effort to the scrubbing motion. Your arms are strong from years of this kind of work, strong in a way that surprises people who look at the rest of you, which is not large, which is in fact rather less than it should be in the dimension of body mass. Your hands are rough and large-jointed, the skin cracked at the knuckles where the lie has worked at it over the years, and the cold has worked at the cracks. You know what your hands look like. You don't think about it. The brush goes back and forth across the flags. The hot water turns grey within the first 2 minutes, the grey of London kitchen floors, which is partly coal dust and partly grease, and partly just the particular quality of dirt that accumulates in places where people live without the time or resources to keep everything clean. You empty the bucket, refill it, kneel again. Your right knee finds a slightly better position on the flagstone, slightly less grinding, and you settle into the rhythm of it. This is the work. This is what work is now. You're good at it. You're fast in the way of someone who has been doing physical work since childhood and has learned all the small efficiencies, the angle of the brush, the wringing of the cloth, the way you move the bucket in a sequence that means you never backtrack over clean floor. Mrs. Porteous has told you once that you're faster than most, and this is the kind of information you hold carefully because it means something about your value to her. And your value to her is a concrete and practical thing that determines whether this arrangement continues. You don't think while you work, except in the surface, automatic way that is not really thinking but is more like the background processing of the brain, cataloguing the room, noting things, making small observations that may or may not be relevant. The range has a loose grate bolt. The scraping sound when Mrs. Porteous opens it. The wallpaper in the passage outside the kitchen is peeling at the top corner near the window, and water has got under it at some point. A brown stain that will spread if it's not addressed. One of the lodgers, the man on the first floor who Mrs. Porteous calls Mr. Clark, and who appears at mealtimes with the particular look of someone who is assembling himself for public performance, has been coughing for the past week, and the cough has a quality to it that you recognise from the shelter last night, the deep, wet quality of a chest that is holding fluid it should not be holding. You think about telling Mrs. Porteous about Mr. Clark's cough. You decide not to. It's not your place, and it's not your information to give. And the last time you offered an observation in a household you were working in, it was taken as an imposition, a reaching above your station, and you lost the work. You've learned to carry observations silently, which is another skill the life provides you with, and which you sometimes think is not an entirely good skill to have, but there it is. The floor takes 45 minutes. Then the stairs, which are narrower than the kitchen and differently difficult. More angles, more corners, the particular challenge of scrubbing a step surface without getting the water onto the step below, which requires a careful management of the cloth that is harder on your arms than the floor work. The stairs in the Porteous boarding house are 14 steps, each step approximately 10 inches deep and 30 inches wide, with a newel post at the bottom that is carved in a pattern that catches dust and requires a separate attention with a narrower cloth. You know this boarding house as well as you know any place, better than most places. You know which step creaks, which is the third from the bottom, and you've learned to step over it automatically when you're coming down with the bucket, because the creak in the early morning before the lodgers are up is the kind of sound that registers wrong, a sound that announces your presence in a space where you are tolerated but not entirely welcomed as a presence. You know where Mrs. Porteous keeps the spare key to the linen cupboard, and that she keeps it there because she's forgotten it behind the copper in the wash-house, and made you go and look for it twice. You know that the lodger in the second-floor back room is a woman, a seamstress named Walker, and that Miss Walker sometimes leaves a half-eaten supper on the window-sill that she means to throw away, and that if you happen to be passing the window with the bucket at the right moment, it can be retrieved and eaten on the short walk around the back of the house to the coal cellar. You have eaten half of Miss Walker's supper on 3 separate occasions. You're not proud of this, but you're not ashamed of it either. You're simply matter-of-fact about it, in the way you are matter-of-fact about a great many things that fall into the territory of survival, which has a different moral grammar from the territory of choice. By 9:30 you've finished the stairs. Mrs. Porteous examines the floor, examines the stairs, nods, hands you 8 pence. Same Friday? Yes, thank you. You go out into the morning. The 8 pence joins the 4 pence in your pocket. 12 pence is a shilling and 2 pennies. This is the total wealth of Ada Marsh on the morning of the 16th of October, 1903, and it is enough for tonight's shelter bed and tomorrow's tea, but only if nothing unexpected happens between now and tomorrow, and in this life, unexpected things have a way of happening with absolute regularity. You are going to the Strand today, not for pleasure, not for anything so complicated as pleasure, but because there is a woman on the Strand, at the Mission Hall near the end near Aldwych, who sometimes has information about work, cleaning work, laundry work, the kind of work you need. Her name is Sister Bridget, which is her mission name, her actual name presumably something else, and she is a small, energetic woman with a manner that contains simultaneously great warmth and great efficiency, and she keeps a kind of informal register of women who need work and households and establishments that need workers, and the match she makes is not always right, but is usually better than trying to find the work on your own. Sister Bridget is the closest thing you have to an employment agency. She doesn't charge you, which is important. The actual employment agencies, the respectable ones, charge a fee to register, and another fee when they place you and require references that you cannot supply, and they would not in any case place someone like you in a household, because the households they work with require a certain kind of woman, which is a woman with a history they can verify, a history that is what it claims to be, and yours is neither verifiable nor entirely what any potential employer would want it to be. You cut through the back streets north of the Lambeth Road, the streets that run between the main road and the river, the narrow terraces of houses that are identical from the outside and wildly varied within, everything from respectable working-class households with net curtains and polished knockers to the kind of multi-occupancy rooms where a family of 6 lives in 2 rooms, and the smell from the yard is something you hurry past. These streets were built in the 1850s and 1860s, most of them solid brick, designed for the families of skilled tradesmen and the upper end of the labouring class. What they are now, 50 years later, is densely occupied in ways that show on the outside in the layer of grime on the brickwork and the broken gutters and the paint on the front doors that is peeling in long strips, showing the previous colour underneath, brown under green under an earlier brown, layers of time made visible. A girl is sitting on a doorstep eating something from a paper bag. She can't be more than 7. She looks at you as you pass with a particular frank assessment of very young children who haven't learned yet to look away. You look back, briefly, and she shows you a piece of bread crust and offers it with the absolute generosity of someone who hasn't yet learned that generosity costs. You smile and shake your head and keep walking. The bridge across the Thames puts you in a different world within 8 minutes of leaving the Lambeth Walk, which is one of the remarkable things about this city, the speed at which you can change territories, the way the river marks the difference between what is north and what is south, with more clarity than any cartographical line, because north of the river is still, despite everything, the idea of money, and south of the river is still, despite the good streets and the respectable families and the missions and the schools, the south side, which carries its own weight of meaning. The bridge this morning is the Waterloo Bridge. You stop in the middle. This is a habit you have had for a long time, stopping on bridges. You're not sure when you started it, but it's been many years, and it has become one of the fixed points of your life in the way that certain small rituals become fixed points, not because they're necessary in any practical sense, but because they provide a kind of rhythm to a life that can otherwise feel rhythmless. You stop in the middle of the bridge and you look at the river. The Thames on an October morning in 1903, from the middle of Waterloo Bridge, is not the thing it looks like in the paintings of Turner or the photographs in the illustrated papers. Those versions clean it, make it atmospheric, make its colour something between silver and amber. What you're looking at is a dark brown-grey moving mass of water, approximately 300 yards wide here, running fast with the tide, carrying on its surface the debris of a city of 4.5 million people. A broken box, the kind wooden crates come in. A dead cat belly up which you register and look away from. Several large clumps of riverweed. Paper, always paper. The city produces an unimaginable quantity of paper, and a great deal of it ends up in the river. Across the water, the south bank shows its working face, the wharves, the warehouses, the cranes, and on the north bank the embankment, and behind it the rooftops of the Strand, and behind that the dome of St. Paul's rising above everything else. St. Paul's has been there since 1710. Wren built it after the fire, although Wren started it in 1675 and it took 35 years to complete. And when the last stone was put in place, Wren was 78 years old, and he would live to be 91, and he would come to the cathedral every year to sit under the dome, and he is buried in the crypt, and his epitaph is carved in Latin and translates as, "If you seek his monument, look around you." You look around. The dome, the city, the river. There is a barge moving under the bridge, very close, so close that you could probably drop a coin onto its deck, carrying what looks like sand, mountains of it, grey-white against the black of the hull. The barge master is standing at the stern with his hand on the tiller, a weathered man in a dark coat, and he looks up as he passes under the bridge and sees you looking down, and raises his hand in a gesture that might be greeting or might just be acknowledgement. One human being informing another that they have been seen, and you lift your hand in return. That's enough of the bridge. You keep walking north. The Strand in the morning is a different thing from the Strand at other times of day. The Strand at noon is packed solid, a river of people flowing in both directions, the omnibuses and cabs and carts fighting for space in the road, while the pedestrians take the pavements and overspill onto the road, and the flower sellers and newspaper boys work the traffic, and the sound of it all is continuous and dense. But at 10:30 in the morning it's still settling into itself, the shops newly open, the first of the day's business starting. The street cleaners are still working at the far end, the men with the brooms and the water carts, pushing the previous day's accumulation toward the drains. The mission hall is a narrow-fronted building between a chemist's and a shop selling second-hand clothes, the kind of building that is easy to walk past without noticing, which is perhaps intentional, or perhaps just the result of being built between two buildings that are slightly more assertive about their presence. Inside it smells like every mission hall, the combination of varnished wood and damp coats, and something that might be incense or might just be the smell of accumulated prayer, if prayer has a smell. Sister Bridget is at the desk in the front room. She looks up when you come in, and her expression moves from whatever she was thinking about to the particular attentiveness she brings to women who come here, which is not pity, importantly, not pity, but something more active, something that is treating you as a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be mourned, and you prefer the problem to be solved version. You have always preferred it. Ada, how are your circumstances? I need a fourth morning. Mrs. Porteous is Monday, Wednesday, and today. I need Thursday or Friday. Sister Bridget opens a ledger. You watch her run her finger down a column. There's a family in Pimlico that wants someone Tuesday afternoons and Thursdays, cleaning and some laundry. They pay 10p a morning. What's the household? Widow, 2 adult sons, one in work, one not. The not in work one drinks. She looks up. He drinks in the middle of the day, and he's been unpleasant to previous women. I'm telling you this directly because you deserve to know it. You think about this. A drunk man in the middle of the day is a category of risk that has a specific shape, one you know well. Does the widow have any authority over him? Some. She's described as firm, but firm is doing a lot of work in that sentence. What happened to the previous woman? Upset, intimidated. She left after 2 weeks. Before that, another one who also left. I'm showing you this because I think you can manage it if you choose to, and because I want to be honest with you about what you'd be managing. This is why you come here. This is specifically why. I'll go on Thursday, you say, and see. Sister Bridget writes something in the ledger, gives you an address in Pimlico, a name, Mrs. Whitmore. You fold the paper into your coat pocket. Are you eating? Sister Bridget asks, not in the charitable pity voice, in the voice of someone checking a practical variable. Well enough. Tonight, I'll manage. There's a soup kitchen on Great Peter Street that starts at 6. No service first, just the soup. I thought you should know. Thank you. You leave the mission hall and stand on the Strand for a moment, in the flow of people, and let the city move around you. No service first, just the soup. You know what that means and what it costs Sister Bridget to arrange it. The mission organisations in this city are in constant negotiation with each other about the conditions of their charity, about whether feeding a body without attending to a soul is doing the soul any favours, whether material relief without moral instruction merely enables the continuation of the conditions that created the need for relief in the first place. It's a real argument, and it has real effects on who gets fed and when and what they have to sit through to get it. The organisations that require attendance at services before provision are not wrong. Exactly. They have a logic. They have a theology. They have a theory of what actually helps a person. But the effect in practice is that a woman who is hungry, but who cannot sit through another hour of "the Lord will provide" without something in her face showing that she doesn't find this immediately comforting, is sometimes a woman who goes unfed. And the organisations that have moved to provision without precondition are sometimes seen by the others as enabling, undermining, providing without requiring transformation. You've sat through hundreds of mission hall services. You have sung all the hymns. You have bowed your head and been prayed over and handed printed cards with Bible verses on them, and had well-meaning hands laid on your shoulders by people who meant every word of what they were doing and believed in what they were doing, and whose belief you are perfectly willing to allow may have helped some people who were helped by it. It hasn't particularly helped you. But you're not sure that's the point. The Strand in the middle of the morning. You have time before the laundry in Vauxhall might have work for you. And you have the cheese in your pocket from Mrs. Greer's. And you have a shilling and 2 pennies and a third morning of work identified for this week. These are the objective facts of the situation. And they are neither good nor bad exactly. They are simply the situation. What you're going to do now is walk. Walking is free, and it is one of the genuine resources of a city like London, the fact that the city is endlessly explorable at no cost beyond the cost of your shoes, and your shoes are already damaged, so the cost is already being incurred, so you might as well. You know this city better than most people who've lived in it their whole lives. You know it in the way that someone who's had to navigate it on foot for 38 years and who has slept in most of its districts at one time or another knows it, which is from the inside, from the street level, from the perspective of someone to whom the city reveals its actual texture rather than its aspirational face. You walk west along the Strand, past the grand facade of the Savoy Hotel, which opened in 1889 and is one of the wonders of the city in the specific sense that it represents a kind of luxury so absolute that it's almost a different category of physical reality. The Savoy has electric lifts. The Savoy has a bathroom attached to every suite, a thing so extraordinary in 1889 that it was reported in the newspapers as a novelty. The Savoy has a kitchen run at that period by Escoffier, the greatest chef in the world, and a dining room where a meal for two costs more than your monthly rent. You have never been inside the Savoy. You walk past it now on the Strand pavement, and through the entrance you can see a sliver of the lobby, the marble and the brass and the carpets, the kind of carpets that are so thick they absorb the sound of footsteps, and a uniformed porter who is turning to address a man in an overcoat who looks like he owns something important. The contrast between what you're looking at and what you're standing in is so absolute that it stopped generating any particular emotion in you a long time ago. It is simply a fact of the city's geography. The way the river is a fact of the city's geography, the way the dome of St. Paul's is a fact. You register it and keep walking. This far west on the Strand is not really your territory. This is the territory of the theatres and the grand hotels and the solicitors' offices and the kind of shops that require appointments. But you are entitled to walk on the pavement, which is a right that costs nothing and belongs to everyone, and you exercise it. Charing Cross Road takes you north, past the second-hand bookshops that are beginning to accumulate here, the ones that spill their stock out onto the pavement in boxes that you've spent hours over, in the years when you had hours to spend, reading the backs of books and sometimes the fronts of books and occasionally a few pages of a book if the weather was not too bad to stand in. You read a lot in the years when you were working the Haymarket, because working the Haymarket involved a great deal of waiting, and in the waiting period before you went out there was often time, and time, when you have it, needs something to fill it, and books were cheaper than most things and lasted longer. You still read when you can. The mission halls have reading rooms. Mrs. Porteous sometimes leaves a newspaper in the kitchen. You have a way of making a newspaper last a very long time, reading it in the particular order that extracts maximum information from minimum effort, working from the front page to the court cases to the classified advertisements, which are their own kind of literature if you read them with the right attention. The newspapers in 1903 are full of the war. Not a new war. The war in South Africa has been technically over since May 1902, the Treaty of Vereeniging, though the effects of it are still present everywhere in the city if you know how to read them. The men coming back from South Africa, the men who came back already and are in the streets, the ones who were invalided out before the end, the ones who are not in any of the institutions designed to handle them, because the institutions are overwhelmed and underfunded and the men are not always in a condition to be handled. You have met some of these men on the embankment. There are men on the benches who have been there since the mid-1880s, the Afghan campaigns, the Sudan, and newer men who are there since South Africa. And you can sometimes tell the difference by a quality in how they hold themselves that you couldn't easily describe, but that you recognise. You also read about the women's suffrage movement, which is becoming impossible to ignore in the newspapers, even for newspapers that disapprove of it. The Women's Social and Political Union, which Emmeline Pankhurst has just founded in Manchester, though you don't know this yet. It's 1903 and the news takes time to reach the particular reading rooms you have access to. But you know about Millicent Fawcett's constitutional suffragists. You know about the meetings in the halls and the pamphlets that appear on walls sometimes in the night. You know about the argument, the enormous argument about whether women deserve the vote. You have thoughts about the vote. You would vote if you had it. You would vote carefully on the basis of which party's policies were most likely to do something useful about the poor law and the conditions of shelters and the question of wages for cleaning women. Your thoughts about the vote are quite specific and practical, but you are aware that the women in the newspapers arguing about the vote are not arguing about you or for you. They are arguing for women like themselves, women of a certain class and education and marital status, and the vision of womanhood they are defending is a vision that does not include a woman standing in a queue outside a shelter at 2 a.m. with a wet boot. This is not an accusation, it's just a fact. The story of women in this city has many chapters, and you are in one of the chapters that the other chapters tend not to discuss. You've reached Oxford Street. Oxford Street is the spine of the shopping district, the artery of the commercial West End, and in 1903 it is in the process of becoming what it will spend the next century being, which is an enormous uninterrupted shop. The department stores are here, or beginning to be. Selfridges isn't built yet. Gordon Selfridge won't open his store until 1909, and when he does it will change the way people think about shopping in the same way that the Savoy changed the way people thought about hotels. But the existing stores are large enough. Marshall and Snellgrove. John Lewis, who opened on Oxford Street in 1864. The shop fronts, the window displays, the windows, enormous sheets of glass behind which the goods are arranged, with a deliberate and sophisticated artistry that is itself a form of communication, saying to the passer-by, "This is what you could have. This is what a good life looks like. This is the version of yourself you are not yet but could become." You look at the windows, not with desire, or not only with desire, with a kind of structural curiosity about how the display works, how the colour and the arrangement direct the eye. This is not a feeling you have cultivated. It arrived on its own, from years of having this particular relationship to shop windows, which is the relationship of someone who will not go inside. In the window of a draper's just off Oxford Street there are several bolts of cloth displayed on an angled stand, and one of them is a deep burgundy. Not red, not purple, something in between, and you remember a dress you had in a colour very close to that, in approximately 1878, which was a dress that did not belong to you in any straightforward sense of belonging, but that you wore on the occasions that required a dress of that quality, and you wore it with gloves and a pair of shoes that were quite good and your hair done in the way that required another woman's help to achieve, and you remember specifically how you felt in that dress on those occasions, which was a feeling that is complicated to describe because it contained simultaneously things that were real and things that were performance, real pride in appearing well, and real pleasure in the fabric against your skin, and also the performance of being something you were not for the benefit of men who were also performing, and the space between the performance and the reality was so small on a good night that it almost didn't exist. That dress is not part of this life. That life is not part of this life. The distance between 1878 and 1903 is 25 years, and it might as well be geological time for the amount of transformation it contains. You look away from the burgundy cloth and keep walking. Your destination ultimately is Vauxhall, the laundry, the possible work, but you have 2 hours before the laundry is the relevant thing, and in the meantime there is the city, and the city is the one thing that has been consistent throughout every version of your life, the one enormous constant, the thing that was there before you and will be there after, and walking it is not quite comfort, but it is the closest thing you have to comfort in this particular category. Let me tell you something about what it actually meant to be a woman of Ada's kind in London in 1903, because the textbooks don't tell it well, and the reformers' pamphlets don't tell it well, and even the novels don't quite tell it well. because the novels want a story with a shape. And the thing about lives like this is that they resist shapeful telling. The language at the time, and the language tells you what the time thought, used the word fallen, a fallen woman, as if you had been in a high place and had fallen from it, as if the fall were an event with a before and after, as if there had been a moment of decision or a moment of catastrophe, and that moment had placed you permanently in a lower category of being. The fallen woman as a type, as a category, as a problem to be solved by the organizations that existed to solve it. The Midnight Mission, the Female Mission to the Fallen, the Rescue Society, the Society for the Rescue of Young Women and Children, the Society for the Rescue of Young Women. There it is. The category has an age limit, implicit in every one of these names, implicit in the whole architecture of rescue as it operates in this city. You can be rescued if you are young. You can be reformed if you are young. You can be placed in a Magdalene home, which is a home that functions essentially as a domestic service training institution with religious instruction included. And after a year or two of scrubbing floors and learning to be grateful and attending chapel, and demonstrating that you are on the correct path, you can be placed in service in a household that has been told about your history in terms that make it a story of redemption rather than a story of anything else. This path is not available to you. The homes do not take women over 40 in most cases. Some have a stated upper limit of 35. You understand the logic. The women placed from the homes into service need to be young enough to be useful for many years, to justify the investment of the home's time and resources in them. But the logic, when you're 56 and standing in the rain outside a shelter that's full, presents itself in a particular light. There are institutions for older women, the workhouse wards for women, which are segregated from the men's and from the able-bodied and from the children, and which have their own hierarchy and miseries. There are the almshouses, the old charitable foundations that provide small rooms for elderly women in conditions of structured poverty, but these require application and references and being of good character, and being able to demonstrate that your poverty is deserving rather than undeserving, which is a distinction the entire apparatus of Victorian and Edwardian charity is built on. The distinction between those whose poverty is caused by misfortune, illness, bereavement, the failure of an employer, and those whose poverty is caused by their own moral failure. And the second category does not, in most cases, qualify for the almshouses. The women on the embankment benches are mostly in the second category, by the charitable organisation's understanding of the categories. Though if you ask those women what category they're in, they will tell you something quite different. They will tell you about the factory that closed, the husband who died and left debts, the children given up, the illness that took the work, the series of small disasters, each manageable in isolation, that in combination produced the unmanageable. They will tell you about the moment, and almost all of them have a moment, a specific turning point they can name, when the situation that had been holding together stopped holding together, and everything that had been arranged around a centre suddenly had no centre. And some of them will tell you about the choice, or what the choice looked like at the time. The night when winter was coming and the money was gone, and there was a man who offered, and what he offered seemed survivable in comparison to what not accepting it meant. And the calculation made a certain kind of sense at the time, the kind of sense that desperation creates, which is a very clear and practical and mathematical kind of sense. And the problem with it is that the mathematics has long-term terms that you cannot see at the moment of calculation, that only reveal themselves years later, when you're 56 and walking through London in wet boots, and the man from that night is God knows where, and the calculations long-term terms are what your life has become. Vauxhall. The laundry is in a yard off Bond Way, behind a wall that is streaked with the grey-white residue of years of steam escaping from the vents in the roof. The smell reaches you before you reach the building. Hot water and lye soap and something else, an organic sweetness that is the steam from wet fabric, the smell of cloth being transformed by heat and pressure into something clean and flat and ordered. You push open the yard gate. The foreman, actually a forewoman, a large woman named Jean, who's been here since before you started coming, who moves through the laundry with the authority of someone who has absolute command of both the machinery and the people, is in the yard overseeing the unloading of a cart. The cart has come from what looks like a hotel, from the mountain quality of the linen, white sheets by the dozen folded into the tight rectangles of professional folding. Jean sees you. Got anything for today? Sheets from the Strand. Need the heavy arms today. 3 hours 6pence. 3 hours of moving wet sheets through the mangle is a specific kind of work. It requires your body in a way that floor scrubbing does not. Requires the large muscles of your back and shoulders. Requires sustained physical effort that generates real heat, which in October is almost pleasant, except that the heat is wet heat, steam, and by the end of 3 hours you will be as wet as if you'd stood in a downpour, and your back will be making its own set of editorial comments. You take off the coat, too valuable to risk with the wet, and fold it over the fence post and go inside. The laundry is approximately 30 feet square, with 3 large mangles along one wall and the copper boilers along another, and the sound inside is the sound of machinery and water, and the thump and hiss of the irons on the ironing boards at the far end where 3 women are working, their faces red with the heat, their arms moving in the automatic rhythm of the press and lift and press. The windows are small and high up and thick with steam condensed on the glass, and the light inside is diffuse, grey-white, the kind of light that makes everything look equally indistinct. You take your place at the first mangle with a woman you know slightly, a woman who gives her name as Rose and who seems to be approximately your age, maybe younger, with the particular look of someone who's been doing this specific kind of work for a long time. You don't talk much during the work. The noise makes conversation effortful, and the effort of the work takes most of what you have. The wet sheets are heavy. Each one weighs more than you would expect. A wet double sheet from a good hotel is 8 or 9 pounds of dense wet fabric, and it has to be fed into the mangles rollers evenly, without bunching, and guided through while the rollers press the water out. The water running down into the tray at the bottom, and then taken from the other side and folded into its holding place before the next one. 8 or 9 pounds of wet fabric, over and over for 3 hours. Your arms know this work. Your shoulders know it. The muscles of your back know it in the particular way of knowledge that is below the level of thought, the automatic knowledge of the body that has done this, enough times that it has its own intelligence about it, adjusting the angle of pull, managing the weight distribution, finding the small efficiencies that make the work sustainable rather than just painful. The first sheet, the second, the third. By the time you've done 20, you're warm through, genuinely warm. Not the surface warmth of moving through cold air, but the deep warmth of working muscles, and your coat over the fence post feels like a very distant problem, and the wet foot is a very distant problem. And for 3 hours the contents of your mind are the angle of the sheet, the sound the rollers make, the steam, the weight, the fold. The present moment, stripped of everything except the physical fact of the work. There are worse states to be in. There really are. Jean pays you at the end of the 3 hours, 6pence exact, counted into your palm from a leather purse that smells of the laundry itself, the clean soap smell that has soaked into everything in this yard. You put on your coat. It's cold after the warmth of the laundry, the contrast more extreme than the usual outside cold, and your wet clothes cling to you in a way that will be unpleasant for the next hour until they dry against your body. You flex your fingers. The joints of your right hand are stiff from the sustained grip on the wet fabric, and you open and close your fists several times in the way you've learned to do after mangle work, the way that keeps the stiffness from settling into something more permanent. 18pence. You have 1 shilling and 6pence. You stand in the laundry yard for a moment, in the steam that rises from the vent over the door, in the warmth of it, because you know the warmth will end the moment you leave the yard, and you are calculating, in the automatic way you calculate everything now, how much of it to take with you. Then you go out into the afternoon. The afternoon of the 16th of October 1903, in the streets between Vauxhall and Lambeth, is the kind of afternoon this city produces with unfailing regularity in autumn, which is grey with a quality of greyness that is actively depressing if you give it attention. A greyness that is not the clean grey of an overcast sky, but the loaded grey of coal smoke and moisture combined. The grey that sits on the buildings and gets into the stone and makes even new buildings look old within a decade. The light's already thinking about ending, though it's only 2:30. The way light in October London starts to withdraw early, starts to compress the usable day, starts to make the evening that is several hours away feel imminent and slightly threatening. You have 1 shilling and 6pence. You need tonight's bed, tomorrow's food, and your boot repaired or replaced before the wet foot becomes something structural rather than something manageable. A boot repair, a proper cobbler's heel plate and the hole filled, costs 4pence if you find the right cobbler. There is a cobbler on the Waterloo Road who has done work for you before, who is old enough to have seen everything, and has no particular interest in the stories of the people who bring him work, which is a quality you value. He charges 4pence for a repair, and he does it quickly, and he has never, in 3 years of occasional dealings, made you feel like anything other than a customer. The cobbler is a direction you can walk, but first, the cheese. You find a piece of wall in a narrow court off the Bondway, with some shelter from the wind, and you stand there and eat the cheese from Mrs. Greer's that you've been carrying since this morning. Hard cheese, crumbly, the kind that was cut some days ago and has been in a cool place since. And it's good, it's genuinely good, and you eat it in 3 pieces slowly, with the discipline of someone who has learned to extract maximum experience from minimum quantity. When the cheese is gone, you remain in the court for a moment longer than necessary. There is a cat on the wall above you, a grey tabby, watching you with the comprehensive indifference of cats. And you look at it for a moment and it looks back, and neither of you is interested enough in the other to take this further, and then you go. The cobbler is on the Waterloo Road, 3rd from the corner, wedged between a pawnbroker and a chandler's, in a shop so narrow that the workbench fills it almost entirely, and the cobbler himself, a man of about 70, small and very upright, with white hair and hands that have the particular quality of people who have done fine detailed work all their lives, a precision, an economy, must turn sideways to move between the bench and the shelves of lasts and tools and finished work waiting for collection. He looks at the boot, turns it over, looks at the hole. "Half sole," he says, not a question. "Just the heel plate, and fill the hole." "Heel plate and patch, 3p. Proper half sole is 6p and will last you through winter." You look at the boot in his hand. You think about the winter, which is not here yet but is coming, can be felt coming in the quality of the October cold. The way the cold this year already has an edge to it, that means business. 6p all, you say. Do it properly. He nods and sets the boot on his last and begins. You stand in the narrow shop and watch him work. This is one of the things you do that might, from the outside, look like killing time, but is not that, is something else, is the watching of skilled work being done well, which is a thing that has its own value, a thing that connects you to the city in a different way from walking or talking or waiting in queues. The cobbler's hands on the leather, the way he selects the right tool from the rack above his bench without looking at it, the sound the awl makes going through the leather, and the sound the thread makes being pulled through, and the smell of the shop, which is the smell of leather and beeswax and the iron of the tools, a smell that is specific and enclosed and has nothing of the outside fog in it. His name is Mr. Radley. You know this from the sign outside, and he knows your name from nothing. You have never told him anything about yourself, and he has not asked, and this is a form of human interaction that you have come to value enormously. The interaction that takes place purely in the territory of the transaction, where what you are is a customer with a boot to be repaired, and what he is a cobbler with the skill and tools to repair it, and nothing outside that exists in this space. He has the boot done in 20 minutes. He turns it over once to examine the work and then holds it out to you. You put it on. The difference is immediate. The solid feel of a repaired sole under your heel, the absence of that direct contact with the cold ground, the boot behaving like a boot again rather than like a leather upper with a hole in the bottom. You flex your foot, it holds. "Good," you say. "Should see you to spring," he says. "Keep the leather dressed." You pay him, 1 shilling and 3p remaining. You walk more easily now. The walking is a different thing with the repaired boot. The gait more even. The physical narrative of the afternoon less dominated by the compensations your body's been making. You notice you've been slightly hunching your left shoulder for the past several days, the small ongoing adjustment your posture has been making to accommodate the uneven stride, and now you straighten it out, roll it back, and feel the relief of a spine that is allowed to be straight. Posture, it matters in ways both practical and other. You've spent a lot of your life thinking about how you hold yourself, what your body communicates to the people around you, what it says and what it conceals. In the years when you were working the Haymarket, posture was professional, a statement about what you were offering and how you were offering it, the particular way of standing and moving that read as available without reading as desperate, because desperation was the quality that reduced your price and your safety simultaneously. You learned to carry yourself with a kind of deliberate ease that was entirely performance, and that, over time, became so ingrained that you couldn't entirely distinguish the performance from the fact, which might have been the point, might have been one of the things the life does to you, that it performs you until the performance is you. Now the posture is different. Not the performance of availability, not the performance of ease, something closer to the performance of invisibility, the particular way of moving through public space that says, "I am here, but I am not remarkable. Do not look too long. Do not calculate. Do not address. I am simply a woman walking through a city, and I have been walking through this city for a very long time, and I know how to be in it, and you do not need to concern yourself with me. It works, mostly. But 56 has a quality that earlier ages didn't have, which is a quality of genuine invisibility that you didn't ask for and don't entirely want, because the invisibility that you performed at 30 was chosen, was a tool, was something you could switch off when you chose. The invisibility of 56 is not chosen. It is conferred by the fact of being 56 and female and poor in a city that has very few uses for women who are all three of those things simultaneously. You walk down Oxford Street and through the Strand and along the Embankment, and you are genuinely not seen. By most of the people around you, you simply do not register. And there are moments when you are grateful for this, when the not being seen means not being assessed, not being calculated, and there are other moments when the not being seen feels like something else, like being a figure in a painting that is being removed from the canvas a little at a time, becoming less present, less solid, less real. You think about this in the particular way you have of thinking about it, which is briefly and without allowing it to settle. The Great Peter Street soup kitchen opens at 6. It's now 3 in the afternoon. You have 3 hours, and you have 1 shilling and 3 pence, and the thing to do with 3 hours on a day when you've worked your morning and there's nothing else that needs doing before the evening is to rest somewhere, because rest is a resource the same way money is a resource, and you spend it and replenish it with the same attention you give to the money. There is a public library on Lambeth Road. You have been going to this library for 4 years, since it opened, since the Lambeth Borough Council built it as part of the great public library expansion that Andrew Carnegie's money and the local government's enthusiasm made possible. The belief that free access to books and reading was a transformative social good that the council was proud to provide. It is a transformative social good. You know this with complete certainty. You go in. The librarian at the front desk is a young man, perhaps 25, with spectacles and a manner that combines genuine love of books with the particular wariness of someone who has learned that public libraries attract a range of visitors, some of whom come for the books, and some of whom come because the library is warm and has chairs. He looks at you when you come in with the wariness, and then makes a small adjustment when your expression communicates something about the first category, and you go to the reading tables. The reading tables are long, oak, with chairs on both sides and lamps in the centre, the electric lamps. This library has electric light, which is still slightly miraculous to you every time you sit under it. The cleanness of it compared to gas, the way it doesn't flicker, the way it doesn't smell. There are 4 other people at the tables. A man in a clerk's collar studying something that looks like a legal text. A woman of about 30 reading a novel, her hat still on, as if she's just come in. 2 old men at the far end who are reading newspapers with the application of people who have the whole afternoon. You go to the periodical shelf. You take a copy of the Illustrated London News from last week, which is as recent as the library holds in this category, and you sit down. The Illustrated London News has been publishing since 1842 and is the visual newspaper of record for the English middle class, its pages full of the wood engravings and photographs that tell the story of the empire and the society and the season. You turn its pages with the attention of someone who is reading in multiple registers simultaneously. The news itself, the text, the actual events being reported, the images, the way the artist has chosen to represent those events, what is included and what is left out, what the composition says about what the artist and the publication consider important, and the advertisements, which are always the most honest part of any newspaper, because advertisements are what the publication's audience is being sold, and what you're being sold tells you who you're assumed to be, and the gap between who the Illustrated London News's advertisements assume you to be and who you are is itself a kind of document. This week, an advertisement for a new electric kettle, for a toilet water described as the choice of the most refined ladies of the aristocracy, for an insurance policy, for a brand of tinned meat that an expedition to the Antarctic has used, which is meant to imply both quality and adventure, the product made glamorous by association with the edge of the world. You read the expedition story, Scott's Discovery Expedition, the preparations for a new push south. Men going into the absolute cold, the cold that makes the October night on the Thames embankment seem like nothing at all. The cold that can kill you in minutes, that can kill you in the way that cold is designed to kill, efficiently and without drama. And these men are going there voluntarily, are spending enormous effort and money to go there, are calling it adventure. You think about the cold of the embankment last night, and you think about the cold of the Antarctic, and you think that the difference between those two kinds of cold, both of which can kill you, is that one of them is chosen and the other is not, and the choosing is everything. The choosing is the entire difference between adventure and disaster, between heroism and shame, between a story in the Illustrated London News and a paragraph in the coroner's records. A woman died of exposure on the embankment on the night of February 14th, 1901. You know this because you were there, in the arches that night, and you knew the woman by sight if not by name. She was older than Meg, older than you, a very thin woman who always wore a red shawl even in summer, and the red shawl was how you knew her, and the red shawl was around her shoulders when they found her on the bench in the morning. Cold, the coroner said. Exposure. Natural causes, which is the phrase they use when the death has a natural mechanism. Cold, and a social cause that they prefer not to name as a cause. There was no story in the Illustrated London News. You put the periodical back on its shelf and take down a novel. Gissing. You've read this one before, one of his London novels, The Netherworld, which is set in Clerkenwell in the 1880s, and which represents the working poor of London with an accuracy that surprised you the first time you read it. The way the accuracy felt like being seen, like someone had looked at the actual texture of the life rather than the version that makes a comforting story. You open it to a page near the middle, somewhere you haven't read for a while and read for an hour. The library is warm, the electric light is steady above your head. The young man at the desk has stopped watching you. The old men are still with their newspapers. The woman with the hat has taken it off now, is leaning forward over her novel with the particular posture of someone who has gone fully inside a story and stopped being present in the room. You go fully inside the story too. When you come back out, it's because the young man at the desk clears his throat and says quietly that the library closes at 5 and it's 1:45. You put the novel back. You thank him, and he nods, and you go out. The afternoon has gone to grey dark, the dusk coming early as it will from now until April, and the gas lamps are being lit on the Lambeth Road, the lamplighter moving along the row of posts with his long pole, the flame at the top of it touching the gas mantle, and the mantle blooming into its particular yellowish light. You've been watching lamplighters light lamps since you were a child, and it is one of the things about London that has not changed. That is the same now as it was in 1865 when you were in the Wiltshire village looking at pictures of London in a borrowed newspaper, imagining what a city with gas lamps would look like. What it looks like is exactly this particular quality of yellow light in grey-brown fog, the lampposts making pools of visible air. each pool containing a small piece of the street that is legible, and between the pools the dark intervals, and people moving through the sequence of light and dark in the way the city has always moved at this hour. You walk toward Westminster. Great Peter Street is off Victoria Street, a short walk from the Houses of Parliament that you pass at a distance, the great Gothic towers of the Palace of Westminster going up into the darkening sky. The Victoria Tower and the Clock Tower, Big Ben sounding 4 o'clock as you pass, the sound of it filling the air with a specific authority that no other sound in this city quite matches, the 4-note pattern that you have heard thousands of times, and that still, somewhere below the level of habit, registers as something, as a statement of scale and permanence that your own life does not contain. The clock tower was completed in 1859. The clock went into service on the 31st of May 1859 and has been keeping time for London ever since, through the fog and the wars and the 10,000 different daily lives of the city below it. The lives that have come and gone in the 44 years since, the entire population of people who were alive in 1859 and are now not alive, and the enormous new population who are not alive in 1859 and are alive now, including you, who were 12 years old in 1859 and are 56 now, and the clock was there for all of it, all of the in-between, the entire distance you have travelled from 12 to 56 from Wiltshire to this pavement. The permanence of the clock tower against the impermanence of everything under it is a thought you've had before, many times, and it is not comforting exactly, but it is something. It locates you in a scale that is larger than your own life, and in that largeness there is a kind of relief from the weight of the specific, the immediate, the fourpence and the wet boot and the queue outside the shelter. Great Peter Street is 2 minutes from Victoria Street. The soup kitchen is in a hall attached to a church, a low Victorian building that has the look of something practical rather than sacred, the look of a building designed for use rather than for the experience of transcendence. There are already women gathered outside, perhaps 30 of them, arriving in ones and twos from the surrounding streets, and you join them with the particular ease of someone who has been joining this kind of queue for a long time, who knows the etiquette of it, the way you don't take more space than you need and you don't make eye contact that could be taken as competitive or threatening, and you keep your voice, when you speak, at a pitch that doesn't carry further than it needs to. Meg is there. She arrived before you, is near the front of the queue, talking to a woman you don't know, and she looks up and sees you, and tips her chin in the same gesture as last night, and you tip yours back. She's alive. She survived the night. This exchange contains all of that without any of it needing to be said. The doors open at 6 exactly. Sister Bridget was right. No service first. You file in, show your hands. They check your hands at some kitchens, looking for the shaking hands of the serious gin drinker. The logic being that providing food to someone who will spend their next money on gin rather than on food is not helping them. Though you have your own views about this logic, and they are complicated. And you're given a bowl. The soup is better than average. Not merely warm water with something dissolved in it, which is the floor-level version of charitable soup. This has actual substance, a broth with barley, and what seems to be carrot and something that might be mutton, the fat floating on the surface in the way that means real animal has been cooked in it. You also receive a chunk of bread, brown, dense, the kind that is actually filling rather than the kind that is filling for approximately 20 minutes, and then leaves you hungry again. You eat standing because the hall doesn't have enough chairs for everyone, and you arrived late enough that the chairs were gone, and you eat with the same slow discipline as the cheese this morning, making it last, tasting it properly, giving it the attention it deserves. Your body's response to being fed after a day of intermittent eating is a kind of quiet urgency. The systems that have been running on reserve coming forward, the stomach demanding that you keep filling it. You resist the urgency. You eat slowly. You finish the bread last, using it to clean the bowl in the particular way that extracts everything. Meg appears at your elbow. Did you find a bed last night? Mrs. Greer. Good. She looks at your feet. Boots better. Cobbler on the Waterloo Road. She nods. She has an empty bowl in her hand and she's turning it, not because there's anything left in it, but out of the kind of fidgeting that means her mind is on something else. There's a bed going at Mrs. Carmichael's on Hercules Road, she says. Woman left this morning, moved south. It's 8p a week. You look at her. 8p a week means a room in a common lodging house, which means a bed in a shared room, which means not the Arches, not Mrs. Greer's floor, not the Salvation Army shelter. It means a fixed address, which means the possibility of receiving messages, which means the possibility of being findable, which means the possibility of accumulating the small continuities that make a life more like a life and less like a prolonged emergency. 8p a week is affordable, just, with 3 mornings at Mrs. Porteous and the laundry work and what the Pimlico household might add, you could manage 8p a week. You could manage it if nothing went wrong. The problem is that nothing going wrong is not a condition you've been able to rely on for some time. When does she need to know? Tonight. She'll let it go tomorrow if it's not taken. You look at Meg. Is it decent? Cleaner than most. Carmichael doesn't let the men's rooms to anyone she hasn't known for 2 years. Women's floor is 3 to a room. Decent women, she says, which means she's selective about who she puts in. Meg's voice on decent carries the particular weight of someone who's aware of all the ways that word can be used and is using it for your benefit rather than her own. I've known 2 women who stayed there. No trouble. You think about this. You think about the arithmetic of it. Tell her I'll come tonight, before 9. Meg nods. She sets her bowl on the rack by the door and goes out without more ceremony than that, which is fine, which is how things work, and you finish the last of your bread and go after her. Hercules Road is south of the Lambeth Road, a street of terraced houses that are old enough to have had several lives, built in the 1820s as the kind of solid middle-class housing that this part of London was supposed to attract when it was being developed, then gradually sliding as the century went on and the wealthy moved further out and the poor moved in through the stages of respectability into the current state, which is the state of houses that are subdivided and subdivided again, where the original single-family homes now contain 4 or 5 families, or in some cases the kind of lodging house arrangements where individual rooms are let by the week, and the common facilities, the kitchen, the single water tap, the outside privy, are shared. Mrs. Carmichael is a woman of approximately 65, Irish originally by her accent, with silver hair and the air of someone who's been running lodging houses since before you were born and has seen absolutely everything that lodging houses produce in the way of human material and has been rendered unshockable by it. She looks at you in the doorway. Name? Ada Marsh. Work? Charring. 3 mornings a week regular, with more possible. References. Mrs. Porteous of Lambeth Walk, and Sister Bridget at the Mission on the Strand. You pause. I've been in London 38 years. I've kept my health, and I've kept out of trouble. This is true, or true enough in the categories that matter to the conversation. Mrs. Carmichael looks at you for a moment longer. 8p a week? Paid Friday? No men in the rooms. Tap in the kitchen from 7 to 10 morning and 6 to 8 evening. Privy is outside, but it's maintained. You share with 2 others, decent women. You'll meet them if you take it. I'll take it. Month in advance. You had not anticipated this. A month in advance is 2 shillings and 8p. You have 1 shilling and 3p. I can give you the first week now and the rest by Friday. I start a new position Thursday. You hold her gaze. You do not look away. Looking away in this kind of negotiation communicates the wrong thing. Mrs. Carmichael looks at you. You cannot tell what she's thinking. Week to week then, she says finally. First week now, Friday by 6 o'clock. Yes. You hand her 8p. You have 7p left. She leads you up the stairs. The house smells of many occupants, the dense human smell of a lodging house that is maintained but cannot disguise what it is. The layers of cooking and coal smoke and bodies and lives. The carpet on the stairs is worn to threads in the centre of each step but is still there, a token of the house's aspiration toward respectability, and the walls are papered in a dark stripe that has been there long enough to have absorbed a shade of everything that has happened in the house. The room is on the 2nd floor. It is perhaps 12 feet by 10, with a window onto the backyard, 2 iron beds and a folding cot pushed against the wall for the 3rd occupant, a chest of drawers with 3 separate drawers presumably allocated by some arrangement you will need to learn, and a hook behind the door for coats. The window is clean. The floor is clean. The mattresses on the beds have the standard institutional smell but are not stained, which is not universal in establishments at this price. 1 bed is clearly occupied. There's a blanket on it, folded, and a small bundle of possessions wrapped in a cloth, and the other bed and the cot are available. The women come back at 8, Mrs. Carmichael says. I'll introduce you then. Bed by the window is yours if you want it, cot if you prefer. Bed. Thank you. She leaves. You stand in the room. It is not large. It is not warm exactly, though it will be warmer than outside when the 3 bodies are in it. It is not private in any sense that the word usually implies, but it is a room. It is a space that is now, for the duration of a week, yours in the limited and conditional sense that a room in a lodging house is anyone's. Yours to sleep in, to come back to leave your few things in, to know exists. You set your coat on the hook behind the door. You sit on the edge of the bed. The springs press back against your weight, with the moderate resistance of springs that have been doing this for some years. You look at the window. The backyard below is ordinary. A patch of flagstone, the privy at the far end, a washing line with nothing on it at this hour. The yard of the house behind is visible over the back wall, similar. Another flagstone square, another privy, a wooden crate that someone has been using as a bench. The sky above the rooftops is deep grey blue now, the last of the day's light, and you can see the top of a gas lamp on the street that runs behind the row, its light just coming up, the mantle warming. You have a room. This is the fact of the evening. After the embankment and the boot and the cheese and the floor in the kitchen and the mangle work and the library and the soup kitchen, the fact of the evening is that you have a room. The 2 women come back at 8, as promised. Their names are Hattie and Clara. Hattie is perhaps 50, stout, with the forearms of someone who does the same heavy laundry work you do, and the manner of someone who is permanently exhausted but is managing it. Clara is younger, maybe 40, sharper-faced, with eyes that take your measure in approximately 4 seconds and file the information somewhere. She was a seamstress, you learn. who has had the particular run of bad luck that hits seamstresses with some regularity in this period. Because the sweated trades, the piecework trades, the trades where you work in your own room or in a small workshop for a middleman who takes most of the margin, are trades that provide a living when the work flows and leave you stranded when it doesn't. Clara had a period without work that became a longer period without work that became this room. Hattie is less forthcoming about her own history, and you don't press. In this kind of living arrangement, you learn what people choose to tell you, and you don't pursue the rest. The rest is theirs. They are, in Mrs. Carmichael's terminology, decent women. This is to say that they have not asked you anything about your history that you would need to deflect, and they have shown you which drawer is available, and Hattie has a small oil lamp that she'll light for an hour before sleep, and Clara has a piece of cheese that she offers to share and which you accept because it would be rude not to, and because cheese. You lie in the bed, in the dark, after the lamp is out. The sounds of the house, footsteps overhead, one of the men's rooms, someone pacing in the way that people pace at night when sleep won't come. From below, from the kitchen, the sound of the range settling, the metal ticking and contracting as it cools. Outside, the street noise that never entirely stops, a cart late on the road, voices, the distant sound of something that might be music from a tavern 2 streets over. Clara is asleep quickly. Hattie takes longer, her breathing going through the stages of the insomniac's slow surrender. You lie and listen, and feel the warmth of 2 other people in the room reaching you across the space between the beds, and the springs under you, and the thin pillow under your head, and the fact of the room around you. You are thinking about a woman named Ellen. You think about Ellen sometimes at the ends of days, in the space before sleep, when the mind loosens and the things it usually keeps from reaching the surface are released. Ellen was a woman you knew in the Haymarket years, 10 years older than you, which meant she was in her late 30s when you met her, and in her early 40s when you last saw her. She'd come from somewhere in the north, Manchester, or near it, and she'd been in London longer than you, and she had the kind of knowledge about the life that came from longer exposure, a knowledge that was not comfortable, but was absolutely practical. Ellen knew things. She knew which houses were safe in the specific sense that safety applies in that context. She knew which men were the kind of risk that was manageable and which were the kind that was not. She knew the network of women who looked out for each other, not through anything organised, not through any formal arrangement, but through the kind of lateral watching that women in that position develop, the way you develop any skill that survival requires. She knew where to go when you needed something, money, medicine, somewhere to stay for a few days, and she knew who could be trusted and who couldn't. She was not your friend exactly, in the way that friendship works in the arrangements that ordinary life provides, but she was something, a constant, a reference point, a person whose continued existence in the world meant something, whose face on a street or in a house you were both in meant a kind of reassurance, the message that she was still there, still managing, still in the city, still alive. She disappeared in approximately 1887, not dramatically, no particular last conversation that you could look back on as goodbye. She was simply there and then not there, the way people disappear in that life, which is without announcement, the city swallowing them quietly, and the question of where they've gone is never definitively answered. The arches, the river, another city, the workhouse, a hospital ward. Any of those answers was possible. All of them had happened to women you knew, and you had learned by that point not to pursue the answer because pursuing it usually took you somewhere you would rather not go. You still Sometimes look for her face in a crowd, not expecting to find it, just looking. The not finding is its own kind of answer. You fall asleep. You wake to the sound of Hattie getting up in the dark before 5, the sound of her moving quietly across the floor in a practiced quietness, the kind that means she does this every morning and has learned to do it without waking the others. You're awake, but you lie still and listen to her leave the room and close the door with the particular careful click of someone who knows exactly how much pressure the latch needs. Then silence, except for Clara's breathing, and the street outside beginning to come alive. The early sounds, the wheels of the first carts, the distant bells of something, not Big Ben from here, but a nearer church, marking 5 o'clock. You lie in the dark and think about Thursday. Thursday is the Pimlico household, Mrs. Whitmore, the drunk son. You have been thinking about the drunk son in the specific way you think about risks that you've accepted, which is not with fear exactly. You're too experienced with a category of risk to respond to it with fear in the straightforward sense, but with a kind of attentive preparedness, a scanning of the situation for the things you need to know. Is the drinking regular or occasional? Is the unpleasantness of someone who is making calculated choices, or the unpleasantness of someone whose behaviour is not really under their control, because the second kind is more dangerous, but also more predictable in its own way? Is the mother firm in the way that Sister Bridget indicated, or firm in the way that means she will say the right things and then not act on them? These are the variables. You cannot know them in advance. You can only go on Thursday and assess them in the room. You get up at 5:30. The cold of the room is the indoor cold, less extreme than outside, but the floor under your bare feet is cold enough that you dress quickly. The practiced sequence of dressing in a shared room that is automatic now, everything done in a few minutes by feel in the dark. Your clothes are what they are. You've been in them for 2 days. In this life, you wash things when you can, which is when there is access to water and soap that doesn't cost money and a place to dry things. And the mathematics of when that access aligns with when things need washing works out to a frequency that is not ideal. You know this. You carry it, the way you carry the smell of the city in your hair and the grime in the lines of your hands as a fact of the physical world, something you manage rather than something you have solved. There is a tap in the kitchen from 7. You go down at 7 and wash your face and hands in the cold water from the tap, a shared kitchen of 5 or 6 people, using the space around you, people who are in the stages of their morning, and you hold the cold water on your wrists for a moment longer than washing requires, because the cold water on the pulse point wakes you in a specific way, is its own kind of clarity. Mrs. Porteous on the Monday morning is the same as always. The floor, the stairs, the 8pence, the porridge. This Monday morning the porridge has something in it that might be a handful of sultanas, and the sweetness of it with the butter and the heat of the range is such a specific and disproportionate pleasure that you are briefly, for approximately 30 seconds, extremely happy. And then the moment passes, and you are just a woman eating porridge before she scrubs a floor, which is fine, which is also enough. On the stair landing, coming down with the bucket, you pass Miss Walker, the seamstress from the second floor back. She's going up to her room with a bundle under her arm, the kind of bundle that is a delivery of work, piecework, pieces of fabric to be sewn into pieces of something at the rate of so many pennies per piece. The economy of the sweated trade in physical form. She looks tired in the way she always looks tired, a tiredness that is structural, built into the posture, the kind that a night's sleep doesn't resolve. You move aside on the narrow landing to let her pass. "Morning," she says. Just that. And then she's past you and up the stairs. That's all. But you've registered, in the way you register things, that the bundle is smaller than usual, that the job she's been given is smaller, that something about her commission has reduced. You register it and say nothing and go back to the stairs with the bucket. On the way back to Hercules Road in the late morning, you stop at the street market on Lambeth Walk, which is one of the oldest street markets in South London, a permanent fixture of the street since before the century. The stalls of second-hand goods and vegetables and fish and cloth, and the particular miscellanea of a general market that accumulates around itself anything that can be bought and sold. You buy a potato from a woman with a brazier, baked potato a penny, and eat it walking, transferring it hand to hand because it's too hot to hold. The steam coming off it in the cold air, and the inside of it, white and floury and yielding, is one of those things that is exactly what it needs to be in the circumstances. No more, no less. There is a stall near the middle of the market that sells second-hand clothes. You stop at it, not to buy. You don't have enough for buying clothes. But to look, which is free, which is permitted, which is the same thing you do with the Illustrated London News and the shop windows. The woman running the stall is sorting a box of items as you arrive, pulling out a coat, examining the lining, setting it aside, pulling out a blouse, holding it up to the light. On the rail at the front of the stall, hung in the way that suggests it's a better item, is a woman's jacket. Dark blue serge. Good buttons. Actual bone buttons, not the ersatz kind. The collar is a bit worn on the inner edge, but structurally the jacket is sound, the serge thick and still holding its shape. It's a better jacket than anything you own. It is also, you look at the price tag, 1 shilling and 3p. You look at it. 1 shilling and 3p is your current total wealth, minus the 8p you owe Mrs. Carmichael on Friday. You do not buy the jacket, but you look at it for a full minute. The blue serge, the bone buttons, the collar that needs only a small repair that a needle and thread could supply. You think about who might have owned it. The middle-class woman for whom this jacket was originally made, who wore it for a season or two, and then put it into the cycle of object that moves from the original owner through the second-hand market and down through the gradations of need until it reaches the stall on Lambeth Walk. You think about what a jacket like this would communicate. Not elegance, not ambition, but the basic statement of self-regard, the message that says, I am someone who wears good clothes, even if the goodness is second-hand. You think about the Pimlico household on Thursday. You think about what you look like when you arrive at a household for the first time, the first impression, the way a prospective charring woman is assessed in the first 10 seconds of the door opening, the way she's read in terms of both competence and trustworthiness, and the way that certain visible markers affect both assessments. You look at your current coat, the man's coat that has served you well for 2 years. It is serving you well, but it is a man's coat on a woman, and it is noticeably large, and it is noticeably old, and the lapels are frayed in a way that is visible from a distance. You look at the blue serge jacket. You look at the remaining money in your pocket. How much for the jacket? You ask the stallholder, even though the tag says 1 and 3. This is the Lambeth Walk Market, and everything on the Lambeth Walk Market has a negotiated price. 1 and 3, she says. Then she looks at you more carefully. 1 shilling. 9p. She looks at the jacket. She looks at you. 10p, and it's yours. 10p, which leaves you with 9p and you owe 8p Friday, and you need to eat between now and Friday, and the mathematics of this does not quite work. I can't, you say, not apologetically, just the flat statement of the arithmetic. She looks at you a moment longer. Then she takes the jacket off the rail and folds it, and wraps it in a piece of paper and holds it out. 8p, I need the rail space. You give her 8p. You have 1 shilling and 7p remaining. You walk back to Hercules Road with the jacket under your arm, and you sit on the bed in the cold room and you unwrap it and you look at it and you try it on. It fits more or less better than the coat, correctly sized, and the serge is thick, and the buttons are good buttons, and the collar is worn but not ruined. You take it off again and look at the collar carefully, running your thumb along the worn inner edge where the neck has worked at the fabric. The lining here is thin, but the outer serge is intact. A careful hand with a needle could turn the collar, reverse it, bring the good side in, and extend the jacket's life by years. You do not have a needle and thread. You have 1 shilling and 7p, a jacket, a repaired boot, and a room. These are the resources of Ada Marsh on the evening of Tuesday the 18th of October, 1903. They are not much. They are also, compared to 2 days ago, considerably more. This is the rhythm of it, the rhythm you have learned over many years. The resources go down and the resources come back up, and the question is always whether the coming back up happens before the going down reaches the floor, and the answer has been yes so far, which is to say that you are 56 and not dead, and that is the evidence of the pattern holding. You hang the jacket on the hook behind the door beside the coat. You lie down. The ceiling of the room in the evening light, the gas lamp from the street sending a thin bar of yellow through the gap in the curtain across the wall above the window, and the house around you with its sounds, and Clara at her sewing in the corner with a candle, the small sound of the needle going in and going through, the thread pulled, the needle going in again. Clara is sewing piecework in the evening. After, however, she spent her day, you watch her for a moment without her knowing you're watching. The angle of her head over the work, the way her hands move with a kind of efficiency that means years, that means the hands know this motion so thoroughly they don't need thought to guide them. The pool of candlelight around her contains everything she needs. The fabric, the thread, the thimble on her right index finger, the small brass scissors on the chest of drawers beside her. There is something about watching a person do skilled work in the last hour of the day, in the quiet of the room, in the candlelight, that is particular and private, and you look away because it feels like an intrusion, as if the candlelight has its own small sovereignty, and you shouldn't look too long into it uninvited. You close your eyes. This is the thing about this city, the thing that is most difficult to explain to people who have not lived in it at this level, the level of not quite enough, the level of the careful accounting of pennies and the constant low-grade arithmetic of survival. The thing that is most difficult to explain is that alongside the difficulty, alongside the cold and the hunger, and the wet boots and the queues and the shelters, there is the city itself, which is immense and inexhaustible and full of things that are not for you but that you walk past and look at and that exist in your life as a form of wealth that is not counted in the ledgers of wealth. The dome of St. Paul's against the morning sky, the river on a clear night with the lights reflected in it, the smell of bread from a bakery at 5 a.m, a cat on a wall considering you, a lamplighter moving down a row of posts and each post coming to life behind him. You have these things. They cost nothing. They're given free to everyone who lives in this city, to the man in the Savoy and the woman in the Arches both. the difference being that the man in the Savoy is too comfortable to notice them, and you are not. And so they are more yours than his in some sense that doesn't get counted anywhere but is real. This is the consolation that is available. You take it. You sleep. Продолжаю. Давай команду. You said, continue, 10:55, Claude responded. Wednesday passes in the pattern of the week, which is to say it has its own texture, but the texture is the ordinary texture of the life rather than anything orchestrated narrative continuation with layered historical and emotional depth. Orchestrated narrative continuation with layered historical and emotional depth. Wednesday passes in the pattern of the week, which is to say, it has its own texture, but the texture is the ordinary texture of the life rather than anything remarkable. And the ordinary texture is worth describing because the ordinary is what most of the life is made of, what all lives are made of if you're honest about it. And the honest accounting of ordinary days is something the stories about women like you rarely do, preferring the dramatic points, the falls and the rescues and the deaths, the things with narrative shapes, over the continuous substance of the days in between. Wednesday morning at Mrs. Porteous, the floor and the stairs, the porridge without sultanas this time but hot, the 8p, the nod from Mrs. Porteous that means she's satisfied. On the way back you stop at the Mission Hall, not Sister Bridget's, a different one on the Kennington Road that is smaller and run by a Quaker man named Mr. Tanner, who has the particular Quaker quality of doing good works without requiring you to sing for them, who has a box of donated clothes in the hall that anyone can look through. And in the box you find a length of black thread wound on a card and a needle still threaded with something you unpick. You take the needle and the black thread. They cost nothing, they are given. That evening, in the room on Hercules Road, with the bar of gas lamplight on the wall, and Clara at a sewing across from you, you turn the collar of the blue serge jacket. This is a small piece of tailoring, not complicated, requiring only the unpicking of the original stitching along the collar seam, the reversing of the collar piece so that the underside, which is less worn, becomes the visible side, and the restitching of the seam. Clara watches you for a minute without speaking and then says, use the running stitch, not the back stitch on the inner seam. It'll lie flatter. And she demonstrates on a scrap of fabric she has to hand, and you do it her way, and she is right. It does lie flatter. You thank her. She shrugs, which means it's nothing, which from Clara means it's something. It means she has decided you're worth a small investment of knowledge. The collar, turned and restitched, looks almost new. The bone buttons on the jacket catch the candlelight and show themselves to be real bone, cream-coloured, slightly translucent at the edge. The jacket on the hook by the door looks like the jacket of a woman who is maintaining herself. Thursday morning you put on the blue serge jacket over your blouse and your working skirt, and you look at the result in the small piece of mirror that Hattie keeps on the chest of drawers, the piece that shows you from the collar up, and you look at the face in it. It is the face of Ada Marsh, 56 years old, and it is the face she has now, the face that 38 years of London have made, the skin weathered in the specific way that outdoor cold and coal smoke weather skin, the lines around the eyes that are lines of squinting against the wind and the cold and, earlier in the life, other things, and the mouth that has the particular set of someone who has learned to keep expression under a certain level of readability in public. The hair, grey now, almost entirely, pulled back and pinned, not elaborately but neatly. The way that neat means you've taken some care and the care shows. You look at this face and you think, yes, This is a face that can go to a household in Pimlico and knock on the door and be assessed in the first 10 seconds as someone who is, in the categories that matter to a woman deciding whether to let you into her house, acceptable. This is a face that is not frightening, not threatening, not obviously the face of someone whose past contains the things your past contains. This is a face that is legible as competent, worn but maintained, looking for honest work. You put on the coat over the jacket and go out. Pimlico is north of the river, west of Westminster, a district of wide streets and stuccoed terraces that were built in the 1840s by the developer Thomas Cubitt, and that carry in their architecture the particular aspirations of that era, the desire to make London look like Paris, to give it the wide pale facades and the classical proportions that Haussmann was simultaneously building into Paris, though London's version is less grand and more domestic. The streets wider than a village but narrower than a boulevard. The houses solid and decent rather than magnificent. The district has changed since the 1840s. The very wealthy have moved to more fashionable addresses, to Mayfair or Belgravia, and what remains in Pimlico in 1903 is a mixture of the respectable middle class, the professional families, the clerks, and the smaller merchants, and the widows living on modest fixed incomes, and below them a layer of the kind of households that have come down slightly from what they used to be, but are determined not to go further, that maintain the appearance of the stuccoed terraces even as the reality behind them has contracted. The Whitmore household is in a street that is in the lower middle of Pimlico's spectrum, the terrace maintained but not gleaming, the front step clean but not whitened, the curtains in the windows decent but not new. You knock at the door. The woman who opens it is Mrs. Whitmore. You knew her from the description Sister Bridget gave you, the firmness, but you would have known her from her face, which is the face of a woman in her mid-60s who has been managing a difficult domestic situation for long enough that the management has become the primary expression of her character. She has sharp eyes and a good coat, the coat of someone who was better placed 20 years ago and who keeps the good coat in service long past when most people would replace it. The coat as a last marker of the position that was. She looks at you. She looks at the jacket. Mrs. Marsh. Miss, you say, which is technically correct and which in this context serves a practical purpose, because the category of widow, while it would explain your situation adequately, invites a certain kind of sympathy and follow-up questioning that the category of spinster does not. Come in. The house inside is cold in the way of houses where the coal is being managed carefully, where fires are lit in a limited number of rooms at limited times of day, where the warmth that a full fire in every room would provide is rationed by necessity into something more calculated. The hall is unheated. The sitting room into which Mrs. Whitmore leads you briefly has a fire that has been lit recently, still catching, the smell of fresh coal smoke strong. She does not sit you down in the sitting room. She takes you to the kitchen, which is at the back, the basement kitchen of a Pimlico terrace, down a half flight of stairs, and which has a range that is going properly and that makes the kitchen the warmest room in the house. She shows you what she needs: the kitchen floor, the scullery, the front hall on Tuesdays, the stairs on Thursdays, the full flight, and on Thursdays also the bedrooms, which are 2 rooms on the first floor, hers and... She hesitates, briefly, an almost imperceptible hesitation. And Geoffrey's. Geoffrey is the son who drinks. He has the back bedroom. She doesn't say this directly, but you have understood it from the moment she hesitated. I need someone who is reliable, she says. I've had 2 women leave in the past month. Sister Bridget explained the situation to me, you say. You keep your voice even, informational, not challenging, not defensive. I understand there are some difficulties. I've worked in households with similar ones. This is true. One of the households you worked for in the early charring years had a man who drank and who was intermittently unpleasant, not violent, but the kind of unpleasant that has in it the possibility of violence, the air of it, the threat that never quite materializes but is always present as a pressure. You managed it by being extremely unobtrusive, by working at hours when he was absent, by learning the pattern of his days and structuring your presence around the gaps. Mrs. Whitmore looks at you. He's not dangerous, she says. Quickly, then, not physically. I want to be clear about that. What is he? She looks at you with the expression of someone who is deciding how honest to be. He's unhappy, she says. He says things that are unkind. He was different before. He had a position at a firm in the city, and when the position went, he didn't. He's been, as he is, for 2 years, you nod. What time is he usually at home? Mornings mostly. He goes out in the afternoons when he's able. I'll do the kitchen and scullery first while he's in his room. I'll do the stairs and hall when he goes out. I'll leave his room until I know his pattern. She looks at you again. The look this time has a different quality. It is the look of someone who's been managing an impossible situation alone for a long time, and who has just heard someone describe the situation as a practical problem with a practical solution, and the relief in that, the relief of not having to explain, of being understood in the practical terms rather than the sympathy terms, is visible in her face for a moment before she controls it. 10p for Tuesday afternoons and Thursdays, she says. What would you need for travelling? I'm in Lambeth. It's a penny each way on the bridge. I'll make it 11p. Thank you. She shows you the scullery, the cupboard where the cleaning things are kept, the coal bucket, the back door. She tells you where the hot water comes from, which is a copper in the scullery that is kept going from 7 in the morning, and the supply of washing soda and the brushes. She's precise and clear, the precision of someone who manages her house with the care that the situation demands, the care of someone doing more with less for a long time. When she finishes, she looks at the clock on the kitchen wall. It's 8:30. He won't be down yet, she says. You can start. You start. The kitchen floor is similar to Mrs. Porteous's, flagstone, slightly uneven, the grout between the stones holding the accumulated grime of decades. But where Mrs. Porteous's kitchen has the smell of a house that is being properly fed, the Whitmore kitchen has a thinner smell, the smell of a house where meals are prepared with care, but the materials of the meals are more limited than they once were. There is bread, and there is dripping, and there is the smell of yesterday's boiled something that was probably vegetables with a small amount of meat. The larder door is ajar, and you can see inside it. Not much, a modest larder. The shelves less full than the shelf space suggests they used to be. You work. The floor takes 30 minutes, the scullery another 20, the scullery being smaller but more detailed in its particular griminesses. The corners behind the copper and the grease mark on the wall beside the range and the wooden draining board that needs a proper scrubbing with the hard brush. At 9:30, you hear movement overhead. Footsteps, heavy, irregular, the footsteps of someone who slept badly or who is not entirely awake, and then the sound of the floor above you. Geoffrey Whitmore's room is directly above the kitchen, and then movement toward the stairs. You're on your knees in the scullery with a bucket and the brush. He comes into the kitchen. You hear him before you see him. The sound of him at the kitchen table, the pull of a chair, And then you hear him see you because there is a pause, a quality of arrested movement, the pause of someone who has registered an unexpected presence. You do not stop working. You do not turn around. You keep the brush moving on the draining board with the same rhythm and pressure as before. He says nothing for a moment. Then, "Who are you?" His voice is the voice of someone who has just woken up, rough at the edges, but under the roughness the residue of an educated accent, the accent of someone who went to the kind of school that teaches you to speak in a particular way, though what the school teaches you and what the years do to it are two different things. You sit back on your heels and turn to look at him. This is important. The not turning is submissive. The turning is professional. You're not a servant who looks at the floor when addressed. You are a charring woman, which is different, which is something more autonomous, which conducts itself differently. He is perhaps 35. Not what you expected, though you're not sure what you expected. He is thin in the way of someone who is not eating properly, with a face that would be ordinary if it weren't for what has been done to it by 2 years of whatever 2 years of this has been. The skin slightly grey, the eyes with a quality of chronic tiredness that is not last night's tiredness but the accumulated tiredness of many nights, and around his mouth a set of lines that are the lines of a man who has been angry, quietly and continuously for a long time. He is in his nightshirt and a robe. His hair is not combed. "Miss Marsh, you say. Your mother engaged me Tuesday and Thursday. I'm sorry if I disturbed you. I'll work quietly." He looks at you. He is calculating something. The same calculation you've seen many times, the one that men do when they encounter a woman in a domestic space, the assessment of what category she falls into and what that category means for how he should behave. You watch him do the calculation. He says nothing for a moment longer. Then he goes to the kettle on the range, lifts it, finds it full, sets it back. "There's tea, you say. I made it 20 minutes ago. It'll still be hot." He looks at the teapot, looks at you. There is something in his face that is briefly unexpected, a flash of something that might in another context be called sheepish. He pours himself tea. "I didn't know Mother had found someone," he says, "to the cup, not to you. I started today. The others didn't." He stops. "I know about the others," you say, plain, without accusation. "I'm not them." He takes his tea and goes back upstairs. You finish the scullery and start on the hall. Mrs. Whitmore comes down at 10. She looks at the scullery floor. She looks at the hall. She says nothing, which is the best possible response, and makes you a cup of tea from the pot Geoffrey has been into, and you drink it standing at the kitchen range in the warmth of the range that is such a specific and necessary warmth on an October Thursday morning. "How did he seem?" she asks. "Tired, you say. You do not say what else you saw. That is not information that belongs to the kitchen at 10 in the morning. He took his tea and went up. She nods. "The stairs, if you're ready." The stairs are 14 steps, narrower than Mrs. Porteous's and steeper, the houses of Pimlico being taller and thinner than the Lambeth boarding houses, reaching up rather than spreading out. You do the stairs from the top down, the right way, with the bucket at the bottom and the water ferried up, and then the dirty water carried down, the mechanics of stair cleaning that you know as well as your own name. The carpet runner on the Whitmore stairs is red, was red, is now the memory of red, faded to a dark pink on the treads and dusty at the edges, and under the runner the bare wood is dark and unpolished, and you run the damp cloth along the edge, and the skirting and the cloth comes back grey. The bedroom doors are both closed. You do not approach the closed doors. You do the landing and the top hall, and you go back down. Geoffrey Whitmore comes down again at 11:30, dressed now, the same thin face and the same quality of tiredness, but assembled into a version that is presentable, a coat and decent trousers and his hair combed. He passes through the kitchen without speaking and goes out the front door, and the house shifts in his absence, some quality of held breath releasing, and Mrs. Whitmore, who's been doing something in the back sitting room, comes into the kitchen, and it is visible in her posture, the small degrees of relaxation. "I'll do his room now," you say. "Ooh," she looks at you. "He doesn't like it disturbed." "I'll leave his things exactly as they are. I'll do the floor and the surfaces. I won't open anything." She thinks about this. "Yes," she says. "All right." The back bedroom of Geoffrey Whitmore is a room that tells you a great deal about Geoffrey Whitmore in the way that rooms always tell you about the people who inhabit them, the way you've been reading rooms for most of your life, the particular literacy of the charring woman and the domestic worker who spends their days in other people's spaces and learns to read those spaces as a matter of both professional knowledge and self-preservation. The room is not dirty exactly. It has not been properly cleaned in some time. But Geoffrey Whitmore, you note, is not the kind of man who creates disorder from carelessness. The disorder here is a different kind. The disorder of withdrawal, of a life that has contracted into this room and the minimum of the house around it. The books on the shelf are well ordered. The papers on the desk are in a pile that is a pile rather than a scatter. On the desk there is an inkwell, dried out at the rim, and beside it a pen and a blank sheet of paper, blank as if he sat down to write something, and then didn't. On the bedside table 2 bottles, both dark glass, both stoppered. One is empty. The other has an inch of something amber in it. Beside them, a photograph in a frame, which you do not look at directly, but which, in your peripheral vision, shows 2 men standing in what might be an office or a club. One of them is probably Geoffrey at a younger version, and the other is someone you don't know and won't ask about. Under the bed, not what you feared, not the bottles, not the detritus of serious drinking. Under the bed is a pair of slippers, set neatly, and a box, also neatly stored, that from the outside is a document box. You clean the floor, you wipe the skirting boards, you wipe the windowsill which has coal dust on it from the outside, the city's endless coal dust that finds every surface. You straighten the bed without removing anything from it. The way the pillow is and the coverlet, you leave as they are but pressed, the wrinkles removed. You take the empty bottle and put it in the scullery bucket. You leave everything else exactly as you found it. When you come down, Mrs. Whitmore is in the kitchen. "He doesn't know about the bottle," she says. Not quite a question. "What bottle?" you say. She looks at you for a long moment. "You'll do," she says, which from Mrs. Whitmore, you understand, is something. She pays you 11p and you go. Walking back to Lambeth, south across the river on the Lambeth Bridge, you think about Geoffrey Whitmore and the blank sheet of paper and the dried inkwell, and you think about the way the disorder in his room was not the disorder of someone who doesn't care, but the disorder of someone who has temporarily stopped being able to organise their caring. And the difference between those 2 things is a difference that matters enormously, even if it's not always visible from the outside. You have known both kinds. You have perhaps been both kinds, at different points. The blank sheet of paper and the dried inkwell keep returning to you. Something about them has lodged. The paper that has nothing on it yet but was set out with intention. The inkwell that has dried while the paper waited. The fact that whatever was meant to be written has not been written, and the stillness of those objects on the desk with the October light coming through the dusty window onto them. You think about writing. You can write. You were taught to write in the church school in Wiltshire until you were 12, the basic writing that was considered appropriate for the children of farm labourers and washerwomen, which is to say, legible, functional, not elaborate. You have used this writing throughout your life in ways that the church school teacher probably did not anticipate, and in ways that she might have recognised as the fundamental usefulness of literacy in any circumstance. You've written to people who no longer exist, letters that were answers to letters that were eventually not answered and then stopped coming, the correspondence that is the thread connecting you to your family, to the village in Wiltshire, to the life before London, and the thread that ran out sometime in the late 1880s when the last person who wrote to you stopped writing, which was your second brother William, whose letters were brief and careful, and which you kept for a long time in a tin box that was eventually lost in one of the moves. You don't write now. There is no one to write to, and the writing requires materials that cost paper and ink, and there is no practical purpose to it, and the impractical purposes, the purposes of writing that are not for a recipient but for the self, the purposes of trying to put the experience into words, because the putting into words is itself a form of making sense of the experience. Those purposes feel, in your life now, like a luxury in the category of things that are for other kinds of people. But you think about writing, walking back across the bridge with the river running below you. You think about what you would write if the inkwell were not dry and the page were in front of you. You're not sure you know. The experience of this life, of these days, the specific texture of the days, the porridge and the bucket and the cold floor and the bone buttons and the man at the table with his tea, it's not nothing at all. But whether it constitutes a story in the sense that writing requires a story, whether it has the shape and direction that words on a page demand, you genuinely don't know. The days are real. They are full of reality, crammed with the specific weight and smell and temperature of things. But they do not have the shape of a story that anyone would read, which is, you suppose, also true of most lives, most actual lives, and the stories that get written are not most lives but the exceptional ones, the ones that have the drama and the shape, the rise and fall and conclusion. And your life has the rise and the fall, but the conclusion is still pending, which is to say you're still alive, still walking south across the Lambeth Bridge with 11 pence in your pocket and a coat over a blue serge jacket. And the conclusion is not yet the kind of thing you can write about. Friday comes. Friday you pay Mrs. Carmichael 8 pence. You have 3 pence left. You sit with this for a moment, in the kitchen, at the common table, with the morning light coming down through the area window, the thin October light that is barely light at all, grey and indirect. 3 pence, 3 pennies, the weight of them in your palm, the specific copper weight, warm from the pocket. 3 pennies will buy a cup of tea and a bit of bread from the street stall, which is a penny and leaves you 2 pence, or a baked potato a penny, and 2 pennies remaining, or the economy of not spending them today and trusting that Monday will bring Mrs. Porteous and 8 pence more. You trust Monday. You do not spend the 3 pence. You keep them. Clara comes into the kitchen as you're sitting there, in the way Clara has of arriving in spaces quietly, with a quality of self-containment that means she always seems equally at home in a space whether it's full of people or empty. She has her work bundle under her arm, the piecework, and she sets it on the table and pours herself water from the jug and drinks it standing up looking at you. There's a needle exchange at the Lambeth Mission on Saturdays, she says. If yours is wearing, thank you. They have thread as well, sorted by colour. A pause. I said you were reliable. This means she has spoken about you somewhere, to someone who has influence over something you might want. You look at her. The sewing circle at the Southwark Church, she says. On Tuesdays, they take in work from the hospital, hemming and simple repairs. It's 6p per half day. Not much, but it's regular. And it's indoors. 6p per half day Tuesday. Which could be added to the 3 mornings at Mrs. Porteous and the Pimlico work and the laundry work to produce something that is, for the first time in several months, approaching enough. Approaching, not reaching, not guaranteeing, but approaching. How do I apply? I'll take you on Tuesday. You look at Clara. She's not looking at you now, is looking at her work bundle beginning to untie the string. But the offer stands in the air between you, the specific weight of it, the weight of one person saying to another, I see you, I have assessed you, I think you're worth a word on your behalf. This is how things happen in the economy of the life you live. Not through formal mechanisms, not through applications and references and the institutional structures of employment, but through these lateral connections, woman to woman, the network that operates under the surface of the official city, that has been operating for as long as women have been in the situation of needing each other, which is as long as women have existed. Thank you, you say. Clara unties her bundle and starts to work. Saturday comes wet. The rain that has been threatening since Wednesday arrives properly on Saturday morning, a serious October rain. The kind that is not quite a storm but is committed, that falls straight and steady and means to continue. You know, this rain. You have spent many hours in this rain over 38 years, and you know what it costs. The wet coat, the wet hair, the particular misery of wet feet returning after the cobbler had only just resolved them, the way the cold rain compounds the cold air to produce a wet cold that is its own category of unpleasant, worse than dry cold, because the wet cuts through things that the dry cold can't reach. You stay inside in the morning. This is itself a resource, the ability to stay inside, not a resource available to everyone. Meg, on the embankment, does not have a room to stay inside in on a wet Saturday morning. The women in the arches have the arches, but not the room. The specific quality of a room that is yours for the duration of a week's rent, with a door that closes and walls that keep the rain out. You're aware of this difference with a kind of daily, low-key acuteness that does not resolve into anything in particular, into no particular action or emotion, but that is simply present as a background awareness of the contingency of the small good things. You spend the morning mending. Clara had extra thread from her own supply, black, that she has given you without making a transaction of it, and you use it to reinforce the cuffs of your blouse, which have been fraying for a month, and to repair a seam on the working skirt that has been coming loose at the hip. These are the maintenance tasks that the life requires in the same way a house requires maintenance. The constant small repairs that, if unaddressed, become large problems. The hem that trips you, the cuff that unravels and makes you look less than what you're trying to look. Hattie comes and goes. She works at a laundry in Southwark on Saturdays, the kind of work she seems to have been doing her whole adult life, and she leaves in her good coat, slightly better than her everyday coat, a practical distinction, and comes back in the afternoon with money, and with the particular exhaustion that Saturday laundry work produces, the deep tiredness in the arms and the shoulders, and she sets her earnings on the chest of drawers and counts them with the focused attention of someone for whom the count matters very much. You eat lunch at the Mission Hall on the Kennington Road, the arson with Mr. Tanner, who serves soup without a service, though he is there himself and talks to some of the women if they want to talk and doesn't if they don't. You eat soup and bread and a small piece of potato cake that he has made himself, which is lumpy and slightly underseasoned and entirely decent. Mr. Tanner sits near you while you eat. He has a quality of stillness that is not blankness. Behind the stillness there is clearly a great deal of careful thought, and he does not fill silence with words the way many of the mission workers do, the words that are meant to occupy the discomfort of being in the same room as poverty. He is comfortable in the room. He has been in it for 20 years. "How are you settling at Hercules Road?" he asks. So he knows. You knew he would know. The network goes both ways, the women's network and the mission network overlapping at the edges, the information flowing between them about who is where and how they're doing. "Well," you say, "the women are decent. Mrs. Carmichael runs a good house." "She does." A silence. Outside the rain on the window, the steady rain. "There's something I want to ask you," Mr. Tanner says. He says it with the directness that is not aggressive. That is the directness of the Quaker habit of saying what you mean without preamble. "I have a woman who comes here on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She's new to the mission. She came a month ago from a difficult background." He chooses the word carefully. "She's 63 years old, and she's very frightened, and she doesn't know this city or this part of it, and she needs someone to show her where the resources are. The shelters, the kitchen, Sister Bridget, the clothes box, the practical geography." You look at him. "I thought of you," he says, "because you know it all, and because you have," he pauses, "a quality of understanding that is very specific, of not making it worse by the understanding." You sit with this for a moment. This is a form of value being attributed to you that you recognize, and that is different from the value of the cleaning work, which is the value of your physical labor, your ability to make floors clean. This is the value of your knowledge, your specific knowledge of this world, accumulated over 38 years, and not available in any book or any training, and not replicable by someone who has not lived it. "What's her name?" you ask. "Dorothy. Dorothy Beale. She was in a situation in the East End for a long time. She's been out of it for a year, the situation. She's managing, but she's alone and she's frightened." You know what a situation in the East End for a long time means. You know it precisely. "When on Tuesdays?" "Midday. Could you come at midday?" You think about the Tuesday sewing circle that Clara's taking you to. That's in the morning. Midday is possible. "Yes," you say, walking back to Hercules Road in the afternoon, the rain still coming down, your coat over your head for the worst of it, the pavement wet and reflecting the gas lamps that are lit early because of the grey. You think about Dorothy Beale, who is 63 and frightened, who was in a situation in the East End for a long time. You think about what it means to be 63 and frightened in this city. You think about the shape of the years ahead of you, which at 56 are more visible in their shape than they were at 40 or 45, which have a quality of being legible now, of being a length you can estimate. You think about Meg on the embankment bench. You think about the woman in the red shawl in February 1901. You think about Ellen. And you think about what it would have meant to each of those women to have someone who knew the city, the actual city, not the tourist city or the reformer city, but the city of shelters and soup kitchens and mission halls and which cobbler charges fair, and which markets have decent food at the end of the day, and where the constable on the Lambeth Road looks the other way on cold nights, to have that person walk in beside them. You walk back to Hercules Road in the rain and you think, this is work too. This is also work. On Sunday, you go to Greenwich. Not for the view from the hill, not primarily, though you will go to the hill because you always go to the hill when you go to Greenwich. The view from the hill being one of the fixed points you carry through the week, the way other people carry other fixed points. You go because Sunday is the day you give yourself, the day that is not structured around the earning and the spending and the finding, the one day in the week that you try to let be something other than the emergency management of the life. The fare to Greenwich and back is 4pence, 2pence each way, and you have 3pence, which means you walk. This is, on a dry Sunday, a walk of approximately an hour and a half each way, through streets that on Sundays have the quality of streets that have taken a long breath and let it out slightly, the commerce reduced, the cart traffic light, the noise at a different register from the weekday noise, families going to church, children, the particular quality of Sunday that is both rest and restlessness. The day that is different from the other days and is both better and harder for being different. Better because it's rest and harder because rest, when you're not used to a great deal of it, has a way of letting the things you've been keeping at the edges come closer. You walk southeast through Lambeth, then through Bermondsey, the smell of Bermondsey that you have known since your first year in London, the tannery smell and the leather and the vinegar from the pickle factories, the smells of a working district that don't diminish on Sundays because the buildings hold them, the stone and brick soaked through with the product of decades of industry. And then on through Deptford and into Greenwich, the Royal Naval College first. You always look at the buildings first. They're extraordinary. You've thought this every time you've been here and you still think it. The thinking has not been worn down by repetition, because the buildings are in fact extraordinary in the way that some things are genuinely extraordinary, and the word doesn't lose its meaning with use but becomes more accurate. The twin domed buildings with their colonnaded facades, the lawns between them, the river beyond. Sir Christopher Wren designed them, though he was helped by Hawksmoor and Vanbrugh, the great names of English Baroque architecture, all three of them working on a site that was already the site of a palace. The Tudor palace where Henry VIII was born in 1491, and where Mary I was born in 1516, and where Elizabeth I was born in 1533. This same ground where all of them arrived in the world, and where Wren's buildings rose in their place in the 1690s. The pensioners are out this morning, some of them. The older men in their dark uniforms sitting on the benches in the weak October sun, the ones well enough to be outside, the ones who have survived long enough to be old in this place of the old and surviving. You recognise one of them. It takes you a moment to be sure, because it has been more than a year since you were last here, and a year at a certain age can change the face considerably. But the man on the bench near the river wall has the posture you remember. The particular way of sitting, that is the posture of someone who spent many years with a ship's deck under them, and whose body still accommodates the absence of that deck. The slight readiness in the torso, even at rest. He has a patch over one eye. His name is Thomas Buckley. That is the name he gave you the first time you spoke to him, 3 years ago, with the same formal precision you noted then. Thomas Buckley, warrant officer, HMS Repulse, retired. He is very old now, perhaps 78 or 80. His face the colour and texture of teak, and when he looks up and sees you coming toward him, The one bright eye does what it has always done, which is assess you quickly and completely, and then set the assessment aside in favour of simple recognition. Miss Marsh, Mr. Buckley, how are you keeping? Less well than last year, he says, with the precision that is itself a form of health, the precision that means the mind is still clear. But better than many. Sit down. You're making my neck ache. You sit on the bench. The river is before you. The Thames wide here and the light on it silver grey in the October sun that is present but not strong. The light of a season in its latter half giving what it can. A barge moves downstream, heavy, low in the water with its cargo. Behind it a smaller boat, and behind that the suggestion of something larger, a ship's mast visible above the bend in the river. You look thinner, he says. You look older, you say. He makes the sound that is his approximation of a laugh. How's the year been? You think about what to tell him, what the year has been, the rooms you've been in and the rooms you've not been in, the work, the embankment nights, the soup kitchens, the shelters, the shilling and threepence moments, and the fourpence moments, and the eightpence moments, the blue serge jacket on the peg, the baked potatoes, the library, the illustrated London news. Mixed, you say. What does mixed mean? It means some of it was hard and some of it was all right and some of it was... You look at the river. Better than expected. He nods. This is the kind of information he finds satisfactory. He does not press for more. Do you know what today is? He asks. Sunday. October the 20th. Trafalgar Day tomorrow. Anniversary of the battle. He is quiet for a moment. 98 years. Trafalgar. 1805. Nelson on the quarter-deck of the Victory, cut down by a French sharpshooter's ball, dying below decks as his fleet completed its victory, dying in the knowledge that the French and Spanish fleet was broken and the threat of invasion was over. He was 47 years old. He had been at sea since he was 12. Were you at sea in any fights, you ask? This is a question you have never asked him directly, in 3 years of intermittent conversations on this bench. He's quiet for a moment. 3, he says. 2 were small. Engagements, not battles. Gun actions, quick and finished before you'd entirely processed what was happening. The 3rd one was not small. Another silence. In the Indian Ocean, 1868, against a pirate vessel technically, though they'd been pirates long enough to have a fleet and a flag. 7 hours. He says nothing more. 7 hours, you say. 7 hours, he confirms. The noise is the thing nobody tells you. The way the ship's guns firing at close range doesn't just make a sound, it's a physical force. It hits you in the chest each time. And the sound of the other ship's guns, and the sound of the shot going through the hull, which is not the sound you'd expect. It's not a crash, it's a tearing, like fabric. You think about that. The tearing sound of cannon shot through a ship's hull. Were you afraid? He considers this seriously. The honest answer is that I was too occupied to be afraid during it. The fear came after. In the night, hours after it was finished, lying in my hammock and not sleeping, feeling the fear that hadn't had a room to arrive during the fighting. That's the shape of it, I think. The fear comes when there's space for it. You think about the shape of fear, the way it works in your own life, the fear that arrives in the space of quiet, in the nights, in the moments between the action of surviving and the next piece of action. The fear that comes when the immediate emergency has passed and the body, relieved of the immediate demand, begins to process the accumulation. Is it like that for you? He asks. He asks it simply, without the caution that men usually bring to asking you about your own experience, the caution that is either delicacy or discomfort. Yes, you say. The quiet is harder than the noise. He nods. How do you manage it? Walking, you say. Walking is the main thing. I keep moving, and the moving keeps the worst of it at the edge rather than the centre. You pause. And other people. Having other people in the room. Not being alone. Not being completely alone. He looks at the river. I have been completely alone for 11 years, he says, not with self-pity, with the flat precision of a fact. My wife died in 92. The men I served with are gone, most of them. The ones still alive are in places I don't know about. I have this bench and this view, and the men in the wards who change from year to year, and sometimes once or twice a year, a woman from South London who walks 3 miles to sit here and talk to a one-eyed old man. You look at him. 3 miles each way, he says, in October, without car fare. He looks back at you. I know what you have. You don't say anything for a moment. You're not nothing to me either, you say, in case that wasn't clear. He makes the sound again, the approximation of a laugh. You sit there in the thin October sun with the river before you, and the great white buildings behind you, and the pensioners on their benches, and the trees of the park losing their leaves in the wind that comes off the water. The wind is cold. You pull the coat closer. You will go up the hill presently to the view, to the particular clarity that the hilltop provides, the sense of the city as a whole, rather than as the sequence of streets and rooms through which you move your daily life. But for now, you sit. He tells you about the ship. Not the battle, that's done, but the ship, the Victory-class ships, the lines of them, the way a first-rate ship of the line was the most complex object the 19th century could produce. 1,400 men in a wooden world 450 feet long, carrying enough cannon to alter the history of a battle, and therefore the history of the nations that fought it. He tells you about the life on board, which was hard in the specific ways that life on board a sailing warship is hard, the food and the cold and the constant wet and the hierarchy that governed everything, and about the way the sea looked in different parts of the world, the colour of it in the Indian Ocean versus the North Atlantic, the particular green of the Channel in storm that is nothing like any other colour in the world, and the phosphorescence at night in warm water, the way the bow wave lights up, the way a man's hand trailing over the side glows faintly blue. You listen. This is the other thing walking gives you, the other thing the city gives you in its inexhaustible variety, the stories, the other lives, the accumulated specificity of other human experiences, given freely on benches and in kitchens and in soup queue lines and in libraries and in back bedrooms while you're cleaning the floor. The endless variety of what it is to be a person in this city in this time, all of it flowing toward you as you move through the spaces that the city provides, and you absorbing it, carrying it, the weight of it not heavy but ballast, the kind of ballast that keeps you upright. The bell in the Naval College chapel rings 11. I should go up the hill, you say. He nods. He knows about the hill, about your ritual. He's never said anything about it except that it's a good hill. Come back when you can, he says, the same as every time, not demanding, just stating the preference. I will. You leave him on the bench with the river and the October light and the slow turning of the world that he has been watching from this bench for years. The same river from the same bench, the world changing around him while he watches, the ships fewer than they used to be, the sails gone and the steam come, the city on the north bank growing and changing and sending its smoke over the water, and Thomas Buckley, warrant officer, HMS Repulse, retired, watching it all with the one blue eye. The hill is 10 minutes through the park. Greenwich Park is one of the oldest royal parks in England, enclosed since the 15th century, and on a Sunday in October it has the quality of a space that is both public and somehow outside the city's usual register. The grass and the trees and the paths that curve upward toward the hilltop observatory, the people walking, families mostly, and some older men and women alone, and dogs running on the autumn grass. You walk uphill. The hill is steep enough that you feel it in your legs by the time you're halfway up. A good feeling. The kind of physical effort that is not punishing but is purposeful. The muscles of your calves and thighs working against the incline in the clean way of outdoor walking, rather than the compressed way of working on your knees on a kitchen floor. Your breath comes more quickly. The wind off the river is stronger up here, cold and damp and carrying the salt of the estuary that the river becomes a few miles east of here. The smell that is not quite sea but is the approach of it. The world opening out. You reach the top. The view from the hill at Greenwich, in the 21st year of the century's youth, is different in its details from the view that has been here for centuries, different in the ships on the river, the new kind, the steamships with their funnels, different in the South Bank's industrial profile, the power station at Battersea visible now on the horizon, its chimneys not yet built to the height they will reach but visible, beginning. But the essential geometry is unchanged. The river curves through the heart of the city in the great arc that has been there since the last ice age carved the valley, and the city fills the valley on both sides, and from up here the scale of it is visible in a way it never is from inside it. London, 4.5 million people, the largest city on earth, the centre of an empire that covers 11 million square miles, that governs 400 million people, that sends its ships and its soldiers and its merchants and its missionaries to every corner of the globe. The most powerful, the most wealthy, the most administered, the most surveyed, the most written about city in human history. And inside it, the embankment at 2 a.m, the queue outside the shelter, the soup kitchen on Great Peter Street, Meg on the bench, the women in the arches. You stand on the hill and you look at the city, and you hold both of these things at the same time, as you always do from up here, as you've been doing for as long as you've been coming here, the holding of the two things together in the same act of vision, the enormous and the small, the magnificent and the miserable, the city that contains everything, that has always contained everything. The city is not good or bad from up here. It is too large to be either. It is what it is, which is the largest accumulation of human life and human effort and human suffering and human achievement that has ever existed. All of it simultaneous, all of it real, all of it present in the same moment in the same geography. You are a part of it, a small part, an almost invisible part by most measurements. But you are here. You've been here for 38 years, and you're here today, on this hill, with the wind in your face and the city below you, and 1 shilling and 5p in your pocket, and a room on Hercules Road, and a 3rd morning of work starting tomorrow, and a woman named Dorothy Beale, who is coming to the mission hall on Tuesday, and who does not yet know that you are the person who will show her where the resources are. The wind blows, the river moves. Below you, in all that grey-brown sprawl of rooftops and smoke and bridges and streets, 4.5 million people are living there Sunday, each one of them in the middle of a story that is entirely real and entirely their own, each one of them in the middle of something that will not come to a convenient conclusion. that will continue beyond today and beyond tomorrow in all its ordinary and extraordinary complexity. You look at it all for a long time, then you turn and walk back down the hill. The walk home is 3 miles and it is cold and the wind is at your back and you walk quickly, the repaired boot solid under your foot, the blue serge jacket under the coat, and you think about Dorothy Beale, who is 63 and frightened, and about Clara, who said you were reliable, and about Mrs. Porteous and her porridge, and about the library on the Lambeth Road with its electric light and its Gissing novel, and about Thomas Buckley on his bench watching the river. You think about all the women you have known in this city, the ones who are still in it, visible or invisible, the ones who are gone from it, the ones whose names you know, and the ones you knew only by sight, by a red shawl, by a way of standing. All of it is still here. All of it lives in you, the accumulated city, the 38 years of it, and you carry it the way the river carries what the city puts into it, moving with it, changed by it, but still moving. The church bells are ringing 6 o'clock somewhere behind you when you turn into Hercules Road. The light has gone from the sky entirely, the gas lamps already burning, the yellow circles of them on the wet pavement, the last of the Sunday light absorbed into the evening. You go in through the door that Mrs. Carmichael unlocks at 6 and locks at 10, up the stairs to the 2nd floor, to the room where Hattie is already at the chest of drawers counting her week's earnings, and Clara has her work on the table, and the small oil lamp is lit, the flame steady in the still air of the room. Clara looks up. Decent walk? Yes. There's bread on the table. Hattie bought extra. You hang your coat on the hook behind the door. You sit on the edge of the bed and you take off the repaired boot and you flex your foot and it is good. The foot is solid, the heel holds. You look at the room, the lamp and the 2 women, and the window that shows the backyard and the strip of sky above the rooftops that is dark now, but in which, if you look, you can see 1 or 2 stars through the gaps in the coal smoke, faint and high and permanent as the only things that the city cannot touch. Hattie puts the bread on the table. It's good bread. The medium quality bread that is above the grey sawdust bread and below the white bread, but which is genuinely satisfying. And she cuts 3 pieces and puts them out, and Clara sets down her sewing, and you 3 eat together in the small pool of lamplight with the sounds of the house around you and the city outside the window. Bread and the lamplight and other people in the room. It is a suff. It is enough. It is a suff. Tomorrow is Mrs. Porteous, the floor and the stairs and the 8pence and the porridge. Tuesday is the sewing circle with Clara and Dorothy Beale at the mission with Mr. Tanner. Thursday is Mrs. Whitmore and Geoffrey Whitmore's carefully unmoved things and the 11pence. And between them and around them the life continues. The life that is not the story that gets written down. That is not the dramatic version. That is not the fall or the rescue or the death, but is the thing itself, the actual lived texture of the days, which has its own weight, its own substance, its own moments of grace. The lamp burns. Clara goes back to her sewing. Hattie wraps herself in her blanket against the evening chill. You lie back on the bed and look at the ceiling. The same ceiling. The water stain in the corner that maps a journey the damp has taken through the plaster. The crack that runs from the window frame toward the centre. The shadows, the lamp throws, moving slightly when Clara moves the lamp to see her work better. The city's sounds come through the window, a cart on the main road, voices from the tavern 2 streets over, the distant foghorn on the river. There must be fog on the water tonight, the fog coming up from the estuary, the particular low sound of the horn that means ships are there in the dark and cannot see each other, and are speaking their presence into the night. You've been listening to that foghorn in different rooms in different years for a long time. It is one of the fixed sounds of London, one of the things that has been in the city as long as there have been ships on the Thames and fog on the Thames, which is as long as there has been a city at all. Your eyes are closing, the work of the week settling into your muscles, the specific heaviness of hands and arms and knees that have done what they've done, the good, honest weight of physical work well done, of floors that are clean, and stairs that are clean, and sheets that have been pressed through the mangle, and a jacket collar that is turned, and a thread that is reinforced, and a woman in Pimlico whose drunk son's room was cleaned without making anything worse. The accumulation of small acts, the week's worth of them, resting in your body the way the week itself rests in the approaching sleep. Tomorrow will bring what tomorrow brings, which is the porridge, the bucket, the 8 pence, the cold floor warm again, the city beginning its noise before you're properly awake, the bells at 5, the carts at past, the voices. Mrs. Porteous saying, already, the kitchen first, and your hands knowing what to do before your mind has caught up with the day. You are warm enough, you are fed enough, you are sheltered enough, you have a room and women in it, and tomorrow's work already named, and the city around you in all its noise and permanence and complexity and cruelty and beauty. You have the blue serge jacket and the repaired boot, and the 3 pence that you didn't spend, and the knowledge of where the soup kitchen is and where the cobbler is and where the library is, and the route to Greenwich and the bench where Thomas Buckley sits. You have 38 years of this city in you, its streets and its shelters, and its river and its fog and its light, the whole accumulated substance of it, and it is yours in the way that nothing can be taken from you. Not the rooms or the money or the coat or the years, but this, the knowing of the city, the belonging to it despite everything it has done to you, the belonging that is not given and cannot be revoked, and that doesn't ask your history or your category or your references. You are a woman in London. You have been a woman in London for 38 years, and the city has not finished with you yet. Whatever else it is, whatever else you are, the story is not done. The next sentence is not written. The inkwell is not dry. The lamp will burn another hour. Outside the foghorn on the river. Inside Clara's needle going in and going through. Your breathing slowing, the way it slows when the body decides that the day has been enough and the night can begin. The long, reliable surrender of consciousness that is the body's own daily act of faith. The trusting that the morning will come and the morning will be manageable, and the morning will contain what it contains, and you will meet it as you've met all the others. Centuries will pass. This city that you walk through tonight, Ada Marsh, in your repaired boot and your second-hand jacket, this city of coal smoke and gas lamps and soup kitchens and river fog, it will change until it is unrecognizable in almost every particular. The gas lamps will go. The coal smoke will go eventually after more decades of it than anyone should have had to breathe. The workhouses will close. The laws will change. The questions about what women are owed, the vote, the wage, the safety, the right to be seen as more than fallen or standing, as more than a category, as a person. Those questions will be argued and partially answered and answered again. Generation after generation of women arguing and working and continuing. The river will remain, the bridge will remain, the dome of St. Paul's will remain through a war that will put it at the centre of the most famous photograph ever taken of this city. The dome in the smoke of the Blitz, standing, And somewhere in all that change, in all those future decades, women will still be in this city, managing their days, counting their coins, finding their networks, carrying their histories, keeping each other alive with bread on the table and thread, and knowing where the resources are. Some things change slowly, some things move in the long wave. But the foghorn on the river has not changed. People who live near the Thames still hear it at night in the winter, in the fog, the same low call that you are hearing now, and they lie in their beds and they listen and they feel what you feel, which is the particular comfort of a sound that says, I am here in the dark, moving, continuing, finding my way through what cannot be seen by sound alone. That's not nothing, that's everything, actually. Let sleep take you the way the river takes the fog, slowly, completely, without effort, until the surface is smooth and the shapes beneath it are quiet, and the only sound is the low note of the horn in the dark that says, I am here, I am here, I am still here. Let the room hold you. Let the lamp burn its last hour. Let the needle go in and go through in the quiet, the small sound of work continuing past the edge of your attention, and then not heard, and then only the breathing of the women beside you. Let the city have its night. You have had your day. You have earned this. Take it. Good night.